Chapter 1107. However, when everyone's gazes landed on Yang Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table, everyone's expressions calmed down a lot. As long as the sixth young master was there, no one knew what fear was. Countless facts had proven that the sixth young master was extremely good at defeating enemies with fewer people. As the soul of the army, Yang Qindong felt everyone's gazes on him, but he didn't feel uncomfortable at all. This was because he didn't know how many times he had experienced this kind of situation. This was just one of the countless times he had experienced it. Alright, Commander Ding has already explained the situation very clearly. I'm sure everyone knows what we're going to face next. And this young master only has one thing to add. Although the enemy has 400,000 soldiers, they're actually just a motley crew. Their cannons have a short firing range, and they're very old. It's very troublesome to reload them. Not only are our weapons superior to theirs, but we're also not too far behind them in terms of military strength. You should know that this time, we're mobilizing the army and the navy. When Yang Qindong's confident voice resounded in the hall, everyone who heard it revealed a look of confidence on their faces. All of this was brought to them by Yang Qindong, the absolute core. As long as the sixth young master was there, they firmly believed that there wouldn't be any difficulties that could stop them. It was also this existence that led them from nothing to something, from a young age to an adult, to achieve the results they had now. The actions of one person could affect everyone present. This was the important role of a core. Noticing that everyone's faces had become more confident, Yang Qindong continued, there are 4 steps to dealing with the Japanese Army's navy: cavalry attack the Vietnamese line, navy attack Awaji Island, 2 areas of scorched earth, South Sea encircle but don't attack. These 20 words meant that Yang Qindong had already planned for the attack on the Japanese naval division. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Listening to the detailed strategy from his mouth, everyone in the meeting nodded their heads and looked at him with admiration. Even after becoming the Bugnam of Gojoseon, the sixth young master was still the invincible military god on the battlefield. The meeting went on for more than 2 hours. In the end, everyone in the meeting approved Yang Qindong's military proposal with a unanimous vote. After that, everyone began to divide the work and began to do their own things. As the person who proposed the plan, Yang Qindong's main task this time was to set Ping and Beijing as a deterrent to anyone who wanted to attack on him. He believed that with him in the formation, anyone who wanted to attack Ping and Beijing would have to think carefully before doing so. In addition to being in the middle of the formation, Yang Qindong also took the 2 plans of the cavalry attack the Vietnamese line and the navy attack Awaji Island. At this moment, standing in front of him was the new army's commander, Su He. This was originally a general in the Tatar army. He could be said to be an all-rounder. Ever since he surrendered to the 5-star army, he displayed all his talents and finally became a true general in the 5-star army. He also held the position of commander of the army. People like this were usually very proud. This might be a common problem for talented people. However, when facing Yang Qindong, he didn't dare to show even the slightest bit of his temper. There was no other reason other than the fact that the strength of the person in front of him was far greater than his. Perhaps when 2 people's strength were equal, they wouldn't be convinced of each other's strength. Or if one side was slightly stronger, the other side would want to surpass him at any time. However, when one side was much stronger than the other, even if they tried to catch up, they wouldn't be able to surpass him in time. What was left was only admiration and admiration. Yang Qindong, who had the absolute right to speak and had absolute authority, faced Su He without any pleasantries. He directly said, this time, the 1st Cavalry Division will stay in Ping and Beijing. Next, it will be the time for the new army to play the main role. Are you confident? 6th young master, we are confident. I am willing to make a military pledge. Knowing that the world's 1st Cavalry Division was finally not going to steal the limelight, Su He immediately said with some excitement. Although he was very proud in his heart, even when the world's 1st Cavalry Division was established, he was a very popular candidate for the position of commander. Later, he took the initiative to develop his style and gave the position to Tianhu, which became a kind of story. There were also people who always talked about this matter. They said that even if Su He became the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he might not be worse than Tianhu. Every time he heard this, Su He's face would have a satisfied and humble smile. However, only he knew in his heart that Tianhu was indeed very capable. Even if he didn't choose to give up at that time and really became the commander, he might not be able to do better than Tianhu. Although he admired Tianhu's ability in his heart, the proud Su He wouldn't say it out loud. On the contrary, he used this as a motivation to constantly push himself forward. He hoped that one day, he could surpass Tianhu and let everyone know that when he gave the position of commander to Tianhu, he really did it, and not because he was forced to. A person with a goal needed an opportunity. Now that Yang Chendong put the opportunity in front of him, how could Su He not fight for it? Therefore, at this time, he patted his chest and promised. His appearance really made people worry that he would hit himself and cause internal injuries. Good, it's good that you are confident. Yang Chendong timely said, stopping Su He's self-harm, and then talked about the specific matters. The so-called cavalry attack on the Vietnam line referred to the land route from Ping and Beijing to Ji County, which was part of Nanhai Province. The distance between the two sides was a bit too close. If this place was not pacified, Ping and Beijing would be attacked at any time, and long-term stability would become a joke. Ji County, which was separated from Nanhai Province, naturally became a place that had to be attacked. It also gave the new army an opportunity to perform. The investigation data from the intelligence department has been sent over. Ji County is not small, and it is only close to the bustling Ping and Beijing. It has a dense population of 800,000 civilians and 80,000 soldiers. This time, your new army will only have 40,000 soldiers from the 1st and 2nd Divisions, in addition to your new army's 3 cavalry divisions. With 60,000 soldiers against 80,000, and at the same time facing an extremely unfamiliar environment and terrain, you must mentally prepare yourself for a bitter battle. In addition, your new army will also need to send a cavalry division to help the 1st Reserve Division and the 3rd Division to attack Awaju Island. I hope that the cavalry division you send out will be an elite division, understand? As Yang Chendong said this, he didn't forget to carefully look at Su He's face. Things had to be prioritized, and people were easily swayed by emotions. Since he was going to send a cavalry division to help the 1st Reserve Division, there was a high possibility that Su He would selfishly send out the weakest division in order to complete his mission. If that happened, the mission of attacking Awaju Island would undoubtedly become more difficult. This was not something that Yang Chendong wanted to see. Where there were people, there would be internal strife. This was a principle that had never changed since ancient times. Yang Chendong did not attempt to change him. But since he had the final say here, then he definitely would not allow internal strife to affect the overall situation and affect the plan. If someone really did that, then they should just go to wherever it was cool and stay there. It was not easy to find a 3-legged toad, but there were plenty of 2-legged people. Hearing Yang Chendong's reminder, Su He immediately stood at attention and said solemnly, "6th young master, please do not worry. Su He will not let you down. The cavalry division sent to Awaju Island will definitely be the most elite." Very good. This is actually to help you complete your mission better. Because once we attack Awaju Island, the 1st Reserve Division will come back to reinforce you. At that time, it will greatly reduce the pressure on you. Do you understand? Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. He believed that since he had said this much, as long as Su He was not stupid, he should know how to cooperate. Su He left. The military plan was already in his heart. Next, he called a meeting with the 4 division commanders to discuss the matter of sending out troops. After he left, the 1st Reserve Division's division commander, Su Kuda, walked into the main tent with a face full of excitement and came in front of Yang Chendong. As the 1st Division commander of the 1st Reserve Division, Su Kuda knew that he was someone who was about to be put in an important position. He was the important reserve cadre that everyone was talking about. The premise was that as long as he performed well, his future would naturally not be worrying. Therefore, during his time as the division commander of the 1st Reserve Division, he scrupulously abided by his duties and only focused on his job. That was to gather the veterans who had been on the battlefield and had been tempered by the battlefield under his wing. He took care of them and trained them strictly. Considering that the 1st Reserve Division did not have any war missions and only continuously absorbed qualified and mature veterans, and continuously accommodated them, it caused the original 20,000 people of a division to reach the current 35,000 people. It was completely qualified to be called an army. Although he was called a division commander, he was indeed leading an army of soldiers. If it were any other general, they would have already become arrogant. At the very least, they would have taken the initiative to ask for money and use this to expand their influence. However, when it came to Su Kuda, he did not do that. Not only that, but he also changed from a division commander to a logistics manager. Considering that the soldiers were from various ethnic groups and regions, he did his best to care about their lives and not let them have the thought that they were excluded from the collective. It was precisely because of his correct guidance that although the composition of the 1st Reserve Division was extremely complicated, there were no incidents of infighting among the soldiers. This was already very difficult. This naturally attracted Yang Qindong's praise and attention. Since he was a useful talent, Yang Qindong naturally would not let his own hands be covered in dust. This time, he called Su Kuda over to assign him an important military mission. Good steel could not always be polished. It had to be unsheathed to see blood. Chapter 1108. Su Kuda also knew that there was a task for him. At this moment, he was very excited, but he still tried his best to show a calm face. How was the army's morale? As soon as they met, Yang Qindong did not immediately give him a task, but was concerned about the army's morale. Replying to the 6th young master, there is no problem at all. All the soldiers are people who have experienced life and death on the battlefield, and now they are eager to achieve more merits. Su Kuda answered truthfully. Yang Qindong nodded lightly. The composition of your 1st Reserve Division is complicated. Although they are not new recruits and know the discipline of the army, because they have all seen blood and killed people, and some of them have even walked out of life and death situations, these people are often harder to manage. If there is a mistake, it will be a big problem. As the head steward, you have to put in a lot of effort, especially thinking. You can't stop for a moment. Even Yang Qindong had called out the name of the head steward, causing Su Kuda to smile mischievously and guarantee, 6th young master, please rest assured, this student will not dare to neglect even a little bit. Su Kuda, who had graduated from the Academy of Crimson City, called himself a student was not a problem. After all, the title of the 1st dean of the Academy of Crimson City was Yang Qindong's. Good, it's good that you have such confidence. Since that is the case, I can pass on the next task to you without worry. Come, tell this young master what you know about Awaju Island. Yang Qindong began to test the other party. Many times, in a war, you need to know yourself and know your enemy. It is not something that can be done well just by being hot-blooded. Hearing Yang Qindong call himself the young master in front of him, Su Kuda was a little excited. After Yang Qindong was given the title of Bugnam of Gojoseon by the Emperor of Beiming, in most situations, he called himself the king. Only in front of people he thought were close, would he call himself the young master. Since Su Kuda was able to enjoy such treatment, it proved that he had already become a close person in Yang Qindong's eyes. Naturally, he was very excited. In order to perform better, he gathered his words and said, 6th young master, Awaju Island is an independent island. It is the bridge between Nanhai Province and Ge Prefecture, as well as the transit station for goods. As long as we occupy this place, the entire South Sea Road will be isolated. Listening to Su Kuda's knowledge of Awaju Island, Yang Qindong nodded with satisfaction from time to time. It was good that the other party had done the work in advance. He liked the officers under him to use their brains. Only such people could better deal with complicated situations. Only then could they cope with changes by sticking to the status quo. Only then could they take charge of one side of the battlefield. Not long after, Su Kuda also left in satisfaction. In the end, Yang Qindong handed the task of capturing Awaju Island to the 1st Preparatory Division. There were 50,000 Japanese army soldiers there. It was enough to fill their stomachs. Of course, what made Su Kude even more excited was that Yang Qindong had already promised that if the 1st Preparatory Division had soldiers who performed well, they could be considered to be promoted to the Cold Front Division or the 1st World Cavalry Division. Whether it was the Cold Front Division or the 1st Cavalry Division, they were all the best of the best in the 5-star army. Every soldier would be proud to be able to enter one of them. Not to mention other things, just being able to enter the Han Dynasty was the dream of many people. If you don't believe me, you can take a look at the treatment of the Han people in Yangxia. It would definitely make other people envious. A person's birth couldn't be changed, but through hard work, one could be promoted to the Han Dynasty. From there, one's descendants would have the opportunity to become a respected existence. That was also a very good thing. This was also why many of the foreign soldiers who joined the 5-star army often performed very well on the battlefield. With such a great temptation, there were very few people who could refuse. Now that he had received Yang Qindong's promise, it could be seen that once the foreign soldiers below heard this news, it would be impossible for them not to fight with all their might. After talking to Su He and Su Kude separately, Yang Qindong picked up the secret letters and documents on the desk. His attention was focused on Sensei Naganabu of Shanin. Sending troops to attack Nankado, stabilizing the east and south of the Japanese Empire, and at the same time destroying the Japanese Naval Division. This would completely cut off their escape route. This was one of Yang Qindong's plans. However, whether or not this plan could be carried out ultimately depended on whether Ashikaga Yoshimasa would come out and cause trouble. In truth, the time for the army to enter the Japanese Empire was not completely ripe. At the very least, the number of soldiers was far from Yang Qindong's expectations. Currently, in the Asian region, the Japanese Empire was second only to the Great Ming Dynasty. Whether it was the population or the strength of the army, the Japanese Empire was ranked at the top. When facing such a power, it was either not to make a move, or to make a move. One had to make a move until the enemy was eliminated. Otherwise, there would be a lot of trouble. It was also a coincidence that the Emperor of the Backyard Garden could not hold back and made the first move. After the first attack failed, Yang Qindong fell into a passive situation. This was a good opportunity for internal strife, and Yang Qindong absolutely could not miss it. Otherwise, when Ashikaga Yoshimasa unified the entire Japanese Empire, if he wanted to deal with him at that time, he would undoubtedly have to pay a much greater price. Thus, Yang Qindong came. He appeared on the land of the Japanese Empire with a not very sufficient army. This was why he was able to fight steadily and surely. It was not like when he dealt with the other small countries in Southeast Asia, where he did not make a move, but once he made a move, he would use thunderous means. Since he knew that he did not have enough troops, Yang Qindong had to think of other methods. The best method he could think of was to use the Japanese against the Japanese. Nurturing a force to let the Neon people fight against the Neon people was like how the traitor Old Wang was supported by the Neon people of later generations. Thus, Masashi Naganabu became an important chess piece. A lot of secret letters were written about Sensei Naganabu. Most of them were good news. The last secret letter wrote that Sensei Naganabu had unified most of the warlords in the Shanin-do, and the military strength had increased from the original 10,000 to 50,000. Of course, Sensei Naganabu had the wisdom to do this, but more than that, it was because Yang Qindong could afford it. In the face of absolute benefits, not many Japanese army generals could resist the temptation. It was just that 50,000 people were not enough to face the 100,000 troops led by Maori regularization that were about to enter the Shanin-do. Looking at the secret letter, Yang Qindong hesitated for a moment, then wrote a note. Add another 1 million silver taels. In any case, Sensei Naganabu cannot be defeated in the short term. After writing this note, Yang Qindong called Beta Persei, who was guarding outside the door, and handed the note to him and asked him to do it immediately. This was related to his conquest of the entire Japanese Empire. He could not afford to lose. Beta Persei respectfully took the note and left. Before he left, he handed another urgent telegram to Yang Qindong. This was a telegram from Kusanagi City. Not to mention the content, just the names of Tiger's Mane, Yumian, and Yangtze were all included in the telegram, which was enough to prove the importance of this telegram. Looking at the main body of the telegram, he saw the three of them pleading to send troops to Baiming. Since Yang Qindong sent troops to the Japanese Empire, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa felt extremely pressured. Under the instigation of his subordinates, he asked for help from Baiming. After all, the Japanese Empire was still one of the vassal states of the Ming dynasty, and it was also one of the non-conquering states. Now that they were invaded by the Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was personally appointed by the Emperor of Baiming, it was natural for them to work hard. With the support of Yang Qindong and the financial support of the Baiming Zhu family bank, the Emperor of Baiming, Zhu Qiyu, became arrogant. Originally, he was quite afraid that the development of the five-star army was too strong, and he had long suspected that his achievements would overshadow the emperor. However, considering that his financial resources were tight, he had to endure it. However, with the support of the Zhu family bank, Zhu Qiyu, whose financial resources had greatly increased in a short period of time, finally decided not to sit and watch the development of the five-star army. After communicating with Zhu Qizhen of the southern Ming dynasty and Yeshen of the Walla, and everyone's opinions were basically the same, he finally took action. Under Zhu Qiyu's order, all the logistics channels of the grassland five-star army were cut off. For a time, the first city and other places became isolated cities. Fortunately, Yang Qindong was already prepared, so it was not a problem to hold on for a while. The first city had been built for several years, and it had always been self-sufficient, so it was not a big problem for it to be suddenly blocked. However, the situation became very difficult for the new Second Army in Jingzhou and Shaojing. Not only did the Baiming army cut off the various channels from the outside world to the first city of the grassland, but they also sent troops to besiege Shaojing and Jingzhou. Although they restrained themselves and did not send troops to attack, without any external help, once the city was besieged for too long, it would collapse sooner or later when they ran out of ammunition and food. As the most important minister that Yang Qindong left in the grassland, Tiger's Mane naturally saw the problem. Worried, he found the city lord, Yu Mian, and the logistics division commander, Yang Si. The three of them sent a telegram at the same time. The general idea was that they were allowed to leave the first city and go to Jingzhou and Shaojing to bring the new Second Army back. Yang Qindong had said a long time ago that both the people and the land would exist. With this idea, they wanted to protect the new Second Army. However, such a move would inevitably pass through the area controlled by the Baiming army. If it was not done well, it would cause a big change. Therefore, they asked for instructions from Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong, who sighed in his heart, put down the telegram and closed his eyes to ponder. The Great Ming dynasty was still a dynasty with a lot of backbone. Yang Qindong himself did not deny this. It was just that he was too deeply immersed in Confucianism and was used to a comfortable life. It was inevitable that his vision was not long-term enough. Moreover, after Zhu Di, none of the successive monarchs had the intention to expand. It was this period of peace that gave the Western countries a chance to catch up with them. It was precisely because he knew this that Yang Qindong would not let such a thing happen again. He did not want his descendants to blame him. Even if their ideals were not the same, there would be a war sooner or later. However, starting a war now was not what Yang Qindong wanted. Chapter 1109. The war with the Japanese Empire was in a stalemate. If things went wrong, all their previous efforts would be in vain. If the war with Baiming broke out again, not to mention the limited military strength, it was still unknown whether Kikian City's economic system could support two wars. Even so, Yang Qindong still did not regret helping Zhu Qiyu establish the Zhu family bank. This was because it was an act of harming the Great Ming dynasty's foundation. Even though it was temporary, once there was a problem, it would be the beginning of the collapse of the Great Ming dynasty. However, it would take time for that to happen, maybe a few years. Without external help, it might be possible to hold on for decades. Yang Qindong could not place all his hopes on the other side to collapse. However, if he did not wait, did he really have to send troops? Not to mention, the intelligence department had already reported that Baiming, South Ming, and Walla had formed a temporary alliance. In terms of military strength, he was at a disadvantage. Even if it was only against Baiming, the five-star army would not be able to win. Tiger's man and the others' worries were reasonable. Fortunately, the new Second Army's commander did not call back to report. This was enough to show that the situation might be very serious, but at least he could hold on. This was the only thing that Yang Chendong was happy about. After all, it was not the right time to start a war with Baiming. He gently put the stun suit aside. Yang Chendong did not return the call or express his stance. It was a sign that Yang Chendong was observing. The most important thing now was to take down Nanhai. As long as the Japanese Empire's navy was completely destroyed, they would be able to control this area. At that time, no news about this place would be leaked. He wanted to see what Zhu Qiyu would do in the absence of any news. 5 days after the high-level military meeting, the military operations against Nanhai began one by one. The first to act was the ships of the 4th Division. They suddenly appeared in the waters of Awaju Island and then attacked with artillery, destroying all the ships on the island's dock. Then, the transport ships sailed to the dock and the 60,000 soldiers led by the 1st Reserve Division disembarked. At this point, the attack on Nanhai Road had officially begun. As the main base of the Japanese Naval Division, they rarely participated in their own country's civil war. Their main territory was on the sea, which gave them a great advantage. Especially in this island country, they could almost move to any area on the sea. Whether it was firing artillery from a distance or finding a suitable place to land, they were all good at it. The Japanese Naval Division also became the biggest trump card of Admiral Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Especially the Marine Commander Kuroda, who was personally promoted by him, is a subordinate that he can absolutely rest assured. This is also why he didn't panic when he saw the sudden appearance of the 5-star army. The Emperor of the Garden of Heaven had died. Although the process was somewhat unexpected, and even brought about a very bad influence on Ashikaga Yoshimasa, it had also caught him off guard. But when he thought about how he had gotten rid of a huge mountain that was pressing down on him, everything seemed to be worth it. As long as he could solve the current civil war, then after a short period of pain, he could reap the harvest. Especially when he saw that the biggest force opposing him, the Flatwell Field, was slowly retreating under the pressure of his army, and was about to be completely wiped out, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was in a good mood. He even began to imagine how he would take back all the territory that the 5-star army had swallowed after the civil war was resolved, and then make them leave the Japanese Empire with their tails between their legs. He never thought that the 5-star army, in a situation where they were clearly at a disadvantage, would actually dare to suddenly attack Nanhai Road and launch a sudden attack on the Flatwell Field Island. This completely unexpected move really caught Ashikaga Yoshimasa off guard. Baka. King Wunan of Daimyong, you can't keep your word. In the army camp, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was angry. When the commander was angry, the others naturally kept their mouths shut, afraid that the anger would affect them. Among them was the famous Fukada Tani, who had returned after being defeated in Ping and Beijing. At that time, the Grand General had left 30,000 soldiers for him to guard Ping and Beijing. He thought that this was the safest job, and immediately patted his chest and promised that as long as Ping and Beijing was there, he would be there, and as long as Ping and Beijing wasn't there, he would die. Thus, he was praised by Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Then, the 5-star army launched a sudden attack. First, it was the artillery bombardment that reduced the number of soldiers in the army to freezing point. Then, the 1st Cavalry Division's attack began. The terror of this army was still lingering in Fukada Tani's mind. When he thought about how the enemy had attacked the city in just an hour, forcing him to flee in panic, his legs couldn't help but tremble. Then, Fukada Tani met up with the main force and came to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's side. At this moment, no one mentioned the military promise from before. As long as the city was there, the people would be there, and the people would die if the city was lost. However, he knew in his heart that the Grand General definitely hadn't forgotten about this. As expected, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was angry, started to look at the generals below him. When his gaze moved to the front of Fukada Valley, it stopped moving and slowly came to a stop. Even though he didn't raise his head, he could still feel the burning gaze. Fukada Tani slowly raised his head and saw Ashikaga Yoshimasa's scrutinizing gaze. This scene scared him so much that he almost screamed. Fukada Tani raised his head, and then his face was filled with fear. Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't care about this, because he had already spoken. Kuen Fukada, I'll give you 50,000 soldiers. Can you take back Ping and Beijing? This sentence could be understood as giving you a chance to make up for your mistakes. Do you want to take it or not? The strength of the 5-star army had already been proven. Let alone 50,000 soldiers, even if they doubled it by 100,000, so what? He didn't see the Maori regularization who led 100,000 soldiers to attack and defeated and killed the hegemon of the Shanin Road, Uehara Toda, didn't seem to have any intention of moving towards Ping and Beijing. Instead, he went to the Shanin Road. Even this famous general knew to pick on the weak. Fukada Tani was far inferior to this person in all aspects. How could he take back Ping and Beijing? Ping and Beijing was lost in his hands. Now was equivalent to giving him a chance to make up for it. If he refused out of fear, with Ashikaga Yoshimasa's temper, he would probably never be able to make a name for himself. Whether he stretched his neck or retracted his neck, he would be stabbed. At least if he accepted this task, he would be able to live for a few more days. Perhaps he would be able to create a miracle. Helpless, Fukada Tani could only pretend to be full of fighting spirit and say, "General, don't worry. 50,000 soldiers is enough to take back Ping and Beijing." As soon as he said this, the other generals looked at Fukada Tani as if they were looking at an idiot. But then, they all closed their mouths. Since this was an impossible task, it was better to act tough than to pretend to be a coward. In fact, not only the others, but even Ashikaga Yoshimasa himself knew that with just Fukada Tani and 50,000 soldiers, it was impossible for him to pose a big threat to the 5-star army in Ping and Beijing. However, he still did so. Naturally, he had his own reasons for doing so. There was no need for him to tell anyone else. Fukada Tani happily accepted the task. Ashikaga Yoshimasa naturally did not want to make trouble for him. He only said that he had already chosen the 50,000 soldiers for him. The provisions for the army should also be prepared. They could prepare for today and set off tomorrow. Thus, the military meeting ended. After the meeting ended, all the colleagues looked at Fukada Tani differently. It was as if they were looking at a dead man. Everyone could imagine that he had already lost Ping and Beijing and failed once. If he failed again this time, of course, he would definitely fail. At that time, it would be the end of his life. Fukada Tani, who could see something in everyone's eyes, could do nothing. Who asked him to be targeted by the great general? Now, other than obeying, the only thing left was to obey. He walked out of the tent pessimistically. When he returned to his camp and heard his deputy's report, he almost cursed out loud. It was also from his deputy that he found out that the 50,000 soldiers that the great general gave him were mostly old, weak, sick, and disabled. Almost all of them were captives. They were the spoils of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's campaign. Although being captives did not necessarily mean that they were not capable, it was not wrong to say that they were greedy for life and afraid of death. What was the difference between using such an army to conquer Ping and Beijing, which was occupied by the elite 5-star army? "General, we do not have much provisions. It is only enough for 15 days. Although the deputy saw that Fukada Tani's expression was not good, he still had to report some things. Otherwise, he would not be able to do his job properly. 15 days of provisions? Ha. Fukada Tani suddenly found that he was not so angry anymore. On the contrary, he even laughed. Of course, this was not true happiness. It was a kind of sad and bitter laughter because of his uncertain future. It would take at least 8 to 10 days to travel from Yuezhong Prefecture to Ping and Beijing. However, he was only given 15 days of provisions. Didn't that mean that he was only given 5 days to attack? If he failed, there would be no provisions in the army, and it would be impossible for him to retreat safely. It was a mission that he would not be able to return from. Fukada Tani did not understand why the great general made such an arrangement. Was it just because he was not pleasing to the eye? Then why didn't he just give the order to kill him directly? Why was this so? Of course, only Ashikaga Yoshimasa knew the reason. At this time, in his tent, the captain of the samurai team, Yamaguchi Fukada, was standing there with a nervous expression. Previously, he received the mission to kill Matsumoto Kazuma. Although he did not see the corpse, based on his many years of experience, he thought that his old opponent who had lost too much blood would definitely die. When he returned to the great general, he reported the same thing. But who would have thought that in the end, Matsumoto Kazuma did not die? Instead, he stood up and publicly accused the great general. Chapter 11:10. Yamaguchi Fukada had been nervous about this matter. He didn't know how the Supreme General would punish him. This time, he was called to the main tent. He was very nervous, fearing that he would be held accountable for what happened last time. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was somewhat disappointed with Yamaguchi Fukada. He had even sent his own divine archery battalion to him, but he couldn't even kill Matsumoto Kazuma. He even ruined his plan because of this. It was impossible for him not to hate him. Considering that Yamaguchi Fukada's ability was not bad, he didn't punish him. On the contrary, he wanted to give him an opportunity to make a great contribution. Yamaguchi-kun, this time I called you here to give you a special mission. Go to Ping and Beijing to assassinate King Wunan of Daimyong. Is there a problem? What? He thought that he would be reprimanded or even punished. Even if he had to suffer some physical pain, it would be normal. He didn't expect that he would be asked to carry out a mission, and the mission was to assassinate King Wunan of Daimyong. Looking at Yamaguchi Fukada's surprised expression, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a little unhappy. His voice was a little low because of this. What? You don't want to go? Yamaguchi Fukada, who finally recovered, first nodded, then realized something. He quickly shook his head and said, I'm willing to go, I'm willing to go. Please rest assured, Supreme General. This time there won't be an accident. I will bring back King Wunan of Daimyong's head. It was no wonder that Yamaguchi Fukada was so excited. He was completely different from Fukada Tani. The latter was a general in the army. He paid attention to controlling the overall situation on the battlefield and strategizing. Since he was a martial arts expert, he should be carrying out a special mission. It would be a great waste to throw such a person into the battlefield and fight him openly. It was precisely because of his position that Yamaguchi Fukada knew that his opportunity had come after hearing the Supreme General's mission. If he could complete it well, it would be a matter of fame and fortune. It would also make up for some of his previous mistakes. He wouldn't have to live in fear in the future. Yamaguchi Fukada's excitement was within Ashikaga Yoshimasa's expectations. If samurai were afraid and knew fear, then perhaps the Japanese Empire would really be hopeless. After getting a satisfactory answer, Ashikaga Yoshimasa reached out and patted Yamaguchi Fukada's shoulder. He said very encouragingly, very good. There will be people in Ping and Beijing who will cooperate with you. Fukada Tani's 50,000 soldiers will also attract the enemy's attention and create an opportunity for you to act. Hey, Supreme General, please rest assured. If I can't complete the mission this time, Yamaguchi won't come back. He made his own promise. Samurai were not like soldiers. They were true to their words. If they said so, then they would really live and die together with the mission. This made Ashikaga Yoshimasa even more happy. He seemed to have seen the scene of King Wunan of Daimyong being killed. At that time, the leaderless 5-star army would be nothing in his eyes. On Yang Chendong's side, some information about Ashikaga Yoshimasa had also been sent to him. When he saw that the Supreme General of the Japanese Empire had sent 50,000 soldiers to attack Ping and Beijing, he couldn't help but smile. Did he think that 50,000 soldiers could threaten the safety of Ping and Beijing? The one who had come was Fukada Tani, whom he had defeated before. Yang Chendong really didn't know what to say. Of course, he was not a god. He didn't know that a samurai team was secretly coming to Ping and Beijing to take his life. Now, he was thinking about how to deal with the 50,000 Japanese army. Ping and Beijing had been occupied, but it wasn't very peaceful. After all, in the eyes of the Japanese Empire, Yang Chendong was an invader. Most of the people could only swallow their anger because of the strength of the 5-star army. However, there were still some people who had been resisting. It was just like when they invaded China in the future. Many people resisted in various ways. Although they were called ordinary people, they were nothing in front of the armed soldiers. However, many ants could bite an elephant to death. Therefore, during this period of time, Yang Chendong had been leading the migration of people. Speaking of which, why was there so little resistance when Yang Xia had occupied so many places? It was because of the migration of people. When a person wanted to resist and was suddenly transferred to another place, they would have to face a strange group of people, or even a foreign race that they didn't know. Not to mention joining forces with others to organize a resistance. Whether or not they could do such a thing without being reported was something that they should be on guard against. Correspondingly, the most important thing to do in a foreign land was to find a foothold for oneself, not to think about the country and its people. Everyone was unfamiliar with each other, and there was no basic trust between them. In order to live a better life in a foreign land, everyone was thinking of ways to build a solid foundation. At this time, if they could report other people's wrongdoings and gain the attention and rewards of the 5-star army and Yang Xia, it would be very beneficial for them to start a new life. People were selfish. After knowing that resistance was useless, the most they would think about was how to adapt to the situation and live a better life. It was with this mentality that the voices of opposition were completely suppressed, and they slowly moved towards a new life. Yang Chendong adopted the same strategy for the Japanese Empire. What he wanted was to break up the Japanese Empire and reorganize it. In the end, he wanted to completely kill some people's thoughts of revenge and resistance. The migration of people in Ping and Beijing was also in progress. However, because this was the capital of the Japanese Empire, there were more than 1.5 million people. It would take time to achieve what he wanted. Ping and Beijing was not stable internally, so it was not suitable for there to be any foreign enemies. Otherwise, it would be tantamount to giving hope to those who already wanted to feel at ease. Once the 1.5 million people of the Japanese Empire all stood up and resisted, the 5-star army would really have to leave here. I can't let Fukada Tani bring the army to Ping and Beijing, even if their strength is average. Yang Chendong said in his heart. Then his brain was working quickly to find a solution. After the blood transfusion, Matsumoto Fuma's physical condition was getting better day by day. After all, he was at the level of a special ninja. As long as he didn't really lose an arm or a leg, there wouldn't be any major problems. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had recovered 90% of his body, began to pay more attention to ninja training and the growth of the ninja team. After experiencing so much, he knew that if he wanted to live and live well, he must have enough strength. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would only become cannon fodder in the eyes of others. With such a belief, and Yang Chendong gave enough money for training funds, the ninja team began to recover step by step and walked on the right track. Matsumoto Kazuma, who was participating in the training, finally had a smile on his face. He seemed to see the hope of the future ninja. At this time, Beta Persei suddenly appeared in the ninja training ground. For this Bugnam of Gojoseon's close aid, Matsumoto Kazuma knew how powerful he was, so he quickly put down the work in his heart and took the initiative to come and greet him. Matsumoto Kazuma, young master wants to see you, come with me. After just glancing at Matsumoto Kazuma, Beta Persei announced the purpose of his visit, then turned and left. The reason why he personally came to announce this task was to see the enthusiasm of the ninja training. Now that he has a general impression, he can go back and report. Knowing that Bugnam of Gojoseon wanted to see him, Matsumoto Kazuma didn't dare to have any neglect. After agreeing, he walked behind Beta Persei. Along the way, he kept saying good things, trying to get some practical information from Beta Persei's mouth. Matsumoto Fujin had done some research on the Han people and knew that they were a nation with human emotions. A lot of things are about human relationships. As a ninja spokesperson, different from those ninjas who only know how to train, Matsumoto Kazuma has some ways to deal with human relationships. But in the face of Beta Persei, all the words are meaningless, and even led to a reprimand. Matsumoto Kazuma, I'm warning you for the last time. You'd better do what the young master wants you to do, and don't inquire about things that you shouldn't know. Otherwise, you'll be looking for trouble, big trouble. When it comes to big trouble, Beta Persei's voice raised a few notches. Matsumoto Kazuma's forehead was covered in a layer of cold sweat when he saw the serious expression on Matsumoto's face. He repeatedly promised that he would be obedient in the future and wouldn't ask random questions and break the rules of the army. Matsumoto Kazuma, who was scared by Beta Persei, was scared again when he entered Yang Chendong's tent. Matsumoto Kazuma, I'll give you a task. If you complete it well, your ninja training fund will be increased by 50,000 silver. If you don't complete it well, you have to be prepared to lose your life there. The polarization was so serious that Matsumoto Kazuma didn't know what to say, because from beginning to end, he didn't have a choice. Thinking of Beta Persei's warning, he had to pinch his nose and said, yes, please give the order to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Well, the task is very clear. Persuade Fukada Tani, who is rushing to Ping and Beijing, to turn to Shanin Road and cooperate with Sensei Naganabu there to deal with Maori regularization. After giving out the task very simply, Yang Chendong sat with his arms crossed and looked at Matsumoto Kazuma, waiting for his answer. Persuade Fukada Tani, this is the way Yang Chendong came up with to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. If the task is done, there will be no war in Ping and Beijing, which is of course very important for the smooth implementation of the migration plan. As for whether it can be done or not, he is not worried, it just depends on whether the price paid is enough. On the contrary, the person to be sent to persuade him gave him a headache. Later, he found out from the resources that Matsumoto Kazuma and Fukada Tani have a good personal relationship. After all, they used to work together in Ping and Beijing. So he decided to give the task to this person. It turned out to be a surrender mission. Shouldn't ninjas carry out assassinations? Matsumoto Kazuma could only think in his heart, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. In his eyes, Yang Chendong was too strong. Not only was he strong, but the three special ninjas also said that this person's strength was extremely high, and even the three special ninjas were not his opponent. Such a person said such words, he didn't dare to refuse, and he couldn't refuse. Yes. Whether unwilling or not, at least at this moment, Matsumoto Kazuma completely agreed. Chapter 11:11. Northern Road, Roa-Soa County. This was the border between Shanin Road and the Japanese Empire's capital, Ping and Beijing, was in the south. They took their time along the way. Originally, they could have finished the journey in 8 to 10 days. However, with Shintianya leading the way, they walked for 11 days. When night came, he was in the temporary military tent with a worried face. The provisions that they brought could only last for 4 days. Once this news was spread, the morale of the 50,000 soldiers would be immediately disrupted. At that time, no one dared to imagine what would happen. At this moment, Fukada Tani felt like an abandoned child. He had a home but could not return. He had become a rootless tree. It was already late at night. Outside the tent, only the sound of patrolling soldiers could be heard. Fukada Tani was still standing in front of the map with a worried face. This time, they had to deal with the 5-star army. The shadow of the previous failure had not completely dissipated. Thinking of the power of the cannons and the bravery of the cavalry, he did not even have a 10% chance of winning. Although Ashikaga Yoshimasa had told him that the 5-star army had already attacked Nanhai Road, there should not be many soldiers left in Ping and Beijing. However, Fukada Tani did not think this way. King Wunan of Damyang was in Ping and Beijing. How could he not leave some elite soldiers by his side? Not to mention other things, just leaving some firearms behind would be enough to stop them from advancing. It was true that there were 50,000 soldiers, but he knew better than anyone else what kind of quality they were. If they were fighting a smooth battle, they might have some skills. However, once they met a strong enemy, these people would probably run away. Such a strong opponent was actually sent to fight, and only 50,000 weak soldiers. This made Fukada Tani want to curse. He suspected that this was Ashikaga Yoshimasa's plan to kill with a borrowed knife. Everything was because he lost Ping and Beijing, as well as a large amount of gold, silver, and provisions. But who could be blamed for all this? He believed that even if the great general had been in Ping and Beijing, he would have chosen to avoid him. Thinking of this, Fukada Tani couldn't help but sigh helplessly. What made Kun Fukada so worried in the middle of the night? The voice that suddenly sounded from within the large tent seemed so out of place in the silent night, yet it was also so clear that it could be heard. In an instant, Fukada Tani felt goosebumps all over his body. Out of instinct, he couldn't help but yell, "Who is it? Is it a human or a ghost?" Seeing Fukada Tani's big reaction, a person walked out from a corner of the tent and said with a smile, "Kun Fukada, don't be nervous. An old friend has come to see you." Borrowing the dim candlelight in the tent, Fukada Tani was finally able to clearly see the person who had arrived. He then said, "So it's Kun Matsumoto. Aren't you?" Seeing that Fukada Tani had finally reacted, Matsumoto Kazuma laughed and came to less than 2 meters in front of him. He said, "Yes, I've already defected to the 5-star army, but we're still friends, aren't we? We had the same experience. We were both abandoned by Ashikaga Yoshimasa, weren't we?" Matsumoto Kazuma's entry point was very good. He found the same experience that both of them had. Back then, he was also one of the people that the great general valued the most. However, when he didn't complete his mission well, he was met with a bloody massacre. If it wasn't for the 5-star army saving him, he would have already been a dead man. Fukada Tani was the same. As a former famous person, he wasn't a nobody. Because he held a portion of the military power, he was also one of the people that the great general roped in. However, after the death of the emperor, the great general's strength grew again and again. His strength was no longer in the great general's eyes. Especially after losing Ping and Beijing, he didn't have a good day. He was always in fear and didn't know when the great general would come to find trouble with him. Now, it was even better. He brought 50,000 weak soldiers to battle. What he had to face was the 5-star army, which was known as the strongest in the world. This was clearly an act of seeking death. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was an abandoned child. On the contrary, it was very appropriate. In a way, the two of them were both abandoned children. In the past, they were very familiar with each other. Now that they had the same experience and met again, they had a lot of feelings and even a sense of identity. This was one of the reasons why Yang Qindong sent Matsumoto Kazuma to carry out the mission. Two people who had the same experience would always have more things to talk about. Not to mention, with Matsumoto Kazuma's ability, once things went wrong, it wouldn't be easy to make him stay. This gave the matter a 30% chance of success. When others said that he was an abandoned child, Fukada Tani would more or less defend himself. It was also possible that he would accuse the other party of slander. If it was Matsumoto Kazuma who said this, he wouldn't have any doubts. Everyone was too familiar with each other. There were some things that really didn't need to be explained. Another sigh came from Fukada Tani's mouth. He didn't expect that the two of them would meet in such a situation. Moreover, they were both abandoned children. The past could only be recalled and reminisced. People still had to face reality. After all, Fukada Tani was a famous person. He had some strategies. He quickly threw away the unhappiness in his heart and said, "Kun Matsumoto, you came here in the middle of the night. Presumably, you want to kill me. Hee, it's fine. Dying in the hands of an old friend isn't a regrettable thing. I just have to trouble you to make your move quickly and let me suffer less." The two of them didn't have the same standpoint. They were no longer friends and had become enemies. They also knew Matsumoto Kazuma's ability. It was impossible to resist. Fukada Tani simply accepted his fate. After he finished speaking, he closed his eyes and looked like he was waiting for death. Fukada Tani didn't even resist. This was somewhat out of Matsumoto Kazuma's expectations. However, when he thought about how even if he didn't kill him, when faced with the powerful 5-star army, there wouldn't be much of an outcome, he felt relieved. It was just that this time he didn't come to kill, so he deliberately pretended to be surprised and asked, "Kun Fukada, why do you say that? We are friends. How could I come to kill you?" "Oh. You didn't come to kill me?" Fukada Tani opened his eyes at this moment. In fact, when Matsumoto Kazuma appeared and didn't immediately attack him, he could feel that the other party didn't really want to kill him. Otherwise, he could have just attacked directly. Just now, he was just putting on an act to show that even if he died, he wouldn't call for people to attack his former friend. Of course, as a friend, not only will I not harm Kun Fukada, but I will also save you this time. Since he said this, Matsumoto Kazuma didn't hesitate. He told him that King Wunan of Damyang originally wanted to kill him, but after he found out, he pleaded for mercy and said that he would personally go and persuade him. At the same time, he also told him that he would give Fukada Tani a way out. According to Matsumoto Kazuma's words, Fukada Tani was still a very capable person. This kind of person shouldn't be abandoned and die as cannon fodder. He should display his value. So he came. Fukada Tani naturally wouldn't believe Matsumoto Kazuma's words so easily. He even suspected that this was King Wunan of Damyang's intention. However, there was no point in dwelling on this now. The most important thing was to know that he was still useful and didn't have to die. This was the most important thing. Immediately, he pretended to be very grateful and said, "Kun Matsumoto is very considerate, but I don't know what King Wunan of Damyang wants me to do." Matsumoto Kazuma, who had prepared a lot of things to say, didn't expect things to go so smoothly. This made him a little surprised. But after all, it was a good thing. He immediately said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon hopes that Kun Fukada can repent and be saved. In the current situation, it's only a matter of time before Ashikaga Yoshimasa is destroyed. What we need to do is to make the right choice in life. For example, we need to rely on Bugnam of Gojoseon and the 5-star army. Will they accept us?" Kun Fukada asked without hesitation. He wasn't playing any tricks. With his current status, he really didn't have any other choice. Since the Grand General had already abandoned him, he might as well save himself. Although his future was still uncertain, at least he could live for a few more days, right? Of course they will. I have already convinced Bugnam of Gojoseon, and Bugnam of Gojoseon also said that as long as Kun Fukada can show enough sincerity, the 5-star army is willing to accept you. When the time comes, high positions and generous salaries will be waiting for us in front of us. Matsumoto Kazuma seemed to be getting more and more excited as he spoke. It was as if everything would go smoothly if they relied on Yang Chendong. Really? That's great. Fukada Tani also said very cooperatively, but then the excitement on his face disappeared. But Kun Matsumoto, I'm afraid that you don't know my current situation. Right now, my rations can only last for 4 days. Once I don't have enough rations, I'm afraid that there will be a mutiny in the army. At that time, even if I want to rely on the 5-star army, I'm afraid that I won't have the strength and time to do so. That was a condition he was proposing. Since they were going to surrender, they should at least get something in return. Otherwise, why would they listen to their commands and work for them? A 50,000 army only had 4 days of rations. This was the first time Matsumoto Kazuma heard of this. But it didn't matter. Before he came, Yang Chendong had given him a lot of support. So after hearing this, he didn't panic too much. Instead, he laughed and said, "Kun Fukada doesn't need to be so distressed. If you don't have rations, we can buy them." Oh right, this time, Bugnam of Gojoseon, in order to welcome Kun Fukada, specially asked me to bring 500,000 taels of silver. It is now in a forest 10 miles away from the camp. If you need it, you can go and get it at any time. The Dafei kingdom was finally destroyed, and the silver mine on the island was also taken by Xianxia. This greatly reduced the need for silver. With money, Yang Chendong naturally had more confidence. What he used to do against the Japanese Empire was to use money to pave the way. This was to preserve his strength to the greatest extent. Chapter 11-12. When Fukada Tani heard that he had to spend money to buy food, he wanted to laugh coldly. If there really was money, then what else could he say? However, before he could complain, he heard the words 500,000 taels of silver. He immediately froze on the spot. Then, he widened his eyes and asked in disbelief, 500,000 taels of silver? Is this true? It was no wonder that Fukada Tani was so excited. At this time, the money used in the Japanese Empire was mostly Yongla Tongbao. The Yongla Tongbao coins with the words Ji and Mu on them were all made by the Japanese Empire. After Ashikaga Yoshimasa took control of the currency, he began to reform it. The copper used in the currency was almost completely gone, replaced by other things. The Yongla Tongbao coins were originally one of the most exquisite currencies in China's history. However, the Yongla Tongbao coins that appeared in the Japanese Empire were extremely crude and had no value. They no longer had any purchasing power, and even the commoners didn't recognize them. Since the commoners didn't recognize them, there was almost no use for them. The most hateful thing was that the money that Ashikaga Yoshimasa gave to the generals was still the same. This was equivalent to letting the horse run and not letting the horse eat grass. However, it was precisely because he had no money and no food that he was able to control the various armies and make them work for him. Currently, Fukada Tani had a large amount of crude and worthless Yongla Tongbao coins in his hands. If the commoners didn't recognize them, how could they buy food? This was one of the reasons why he was worried. However, now that he heard that there was 500,000 taels of silver, it was no wonder that his eyes lit up. All of Fukada Tani's actions were seen by Matsumoto Kazuma. He immediately said, "Of course it's true. Why would I lie about such an important matter? If you don't believe me, we can go to the forest 10 li away and get the money." Okay. Fukada Tani didn't try to hide anything. In his opinion, nothing was more important than money. Silver was only silver when it was held in one's hands. Immediately, Fukada Tani sent someone to summon his own guards. A group of over 100 people left the camp in the middle of the night and headed straight for the forest 10 li away. Fukada Tani trusted Matsumoto Kazuma so much because he knew that if Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to kill him, there was no need to beat around the bush. If Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to kill him, he could have killed him just now. The truth did not disappoint him. Sure enough, he found 10 large chests, each of which contained 50,000 taels of silver. After checking, Fukada Tani was naturally satisfied. Together with Matsumoto Kazuma and the guards, they carried the 10 large boxes back to the barracks. When they returned, it was already dawn. Many soldiers had already left their tents and were preparing to eat breakfast. Coincidentally, one of the chests had been knocked over on the ground. When the dazzling silver fell to the ground, it immediately attracted a lot of attention. Soon after, the news spread and Fukada Tani's 500,000 taels of silver was known by everyone. When they returned to the main tent, Fukada Tani had already changed from his previous dispirited state to that of excitement and excitement. What Matsumoto Kazuma said next made him even more excited. "Kuen Fukada, I have a plan that can save us 500,000 taels of silver and get enough food. But I don't know if I have the guts to do it." "Oh? What plan?" With 500,000 taels of silver in front of him, Fukada Tani no longer had any doubts about Matsumoto Kazuma. He immediately asked eagerly. Knowing that the time was right, Matsumoto Kazuma did not intend to keep him in suspense. He immediately spoke of his idea. It was very simple. It was to snatch food. Snatching food was a common thing for rebel armies. But to Fukada Tani, who had 50,000 soldiers, it would be very difficult to gather enough food by snatching food from the commoners. This was because the commoners would not foolishly leave their food at home. Instead, they would hide it. Moreover, without enough accurate information, not only would they not be able to snatch enough food, it was very likely that they would anger the commoners and lead to a chaotic battle, damaging their own strength. Thus, this was not something that an ordinary army would be willing to do. However, if they were to snatch food from other armies, the effect would be completely different. Since they were both armies, their food would naturally be gathered together. There would be no need to search everywhere, and they would be able to gather large amounts of food to solve their urgent needs. Matsumoto Kazuma's idea of snatching food was to snatch food from other armies. After he spoke of his idea, Fukada Tani nodded continuously until he finally laughed out loud. After an hour, the various junior generals who were waiting outside the main tent were finally allowed to enter. Previously, these junior generals looked down on Fukada Tani. Some of them had even thought about where they would run to once the war started. But now, with the temptation of 500,000 taels of silver, everyone's mentality had completely changed. Money could make the world go round, let alone ordinary people. Fukada Tani was also watching everyone who entered the tent. When he saw that their mental state had completely changed, and many of them even looked at him with flattering eyes, he was indescribably happy. At this moment, he finally felt like he was in charge of an army. After waiting for all the junior generals to enter the tent, Fukada Tani, who was sitting at the head of the table, finally opened his mouth and said, "All right, since everyone is here, then there are some things that I can tell you directly. We are a deserted army, everyone knows that, right? How could everyone not know about this matter?" Because of this, everyone couldn't help but nod their heads. However, there were some who didn't understand why the general would suddenly say such words. What was his intention? What we are going to face next is the 5-star army, an army that has the advantage of powerful firearms. Everyone knows that, right? In exchange, everyone still nodded their heads. They were even more confused about Fukada Tani's intention. Facing such an opponent, we are equivalent to sending ourselves to death. Does anyone have any objections? Still, everyone nodded their heads in unison. Therefore, Fukada Tani revealed his true intention. Since we know that we are going to die, then as the commander, how can I watch everyone die? Therefore, I have decided that we will not attack Ping and Beijing. We will turn to the Shanin Road and attack the Maori regularization. The grain in his hands will be our target this time. That's right, this was the idea that Matsumoto Kazuma gave to Fukada Tani. The so-called snatching of grain was to snatch the grain of the Maori regularization's 100,000 soldiers that were heading to the Shanin Road. Similarly, the Maori regularization was under the command of the great general. Not only were the soldiers composed of young adults, but their grain was also very abundant. If they could snatch their grain, then it would definitely solve the problem of their own grain being depleted. At the same time, it was tantamount to showing loyalty to Bugnam of Gojoseon and making a contribution. It could be said that the 500,000 taels of silver were not taken for nothing. It could also be said that they had found a way out for themselves in the future. Fukada Tani's decision was heard by everyone. Naturally, they were very surprised. They also knew that the grain in the army could only last for 4 days. If they did not snatch the grain, they would not be able to survive. While everyone was still digesting this decision, Fukada Tani said something shocking again. He would take out 100,000 taels of silver as a reward for the army that performed the best in this battle. As soon as this was said, it immediately attracted everyone's interest. 100,000 taels of silver, for the Japanese army leaders who were used to hardship, it was definitely a large amount. For this, they were willing to give it a try. With the silver as a reward, this military meeting was very successful. Even in the main tent, the young generals were fighting over who would be the vanguard. In the end, it was Fukada Tani who made the decision that there was no priority for this battle. Whoever could snatch the most grain and bring it back would be the biggest winner and would be able to receive the 100,000 taels of silver as a reward. This was good. When the meeting was over, many of the young generals either secretly joined forces to increase their own strength or wanted to act alone and take all the food for themselves. There were even more who began to lead the troops as soon as they returned to their tents. It was as if they were afraid that if they were a step late, they would not be able to get any benefits. People say that interest is the best teacher. When a person wholeheartedly wanted to do something, there was nothing that could not be done or not done well. When everyone's initiative was completely aroused, the power that could be displayed was also amazing. 3 days later, Mari Regularization, who was leading the main army towards Shanin Road and had continuously defeated Sensei Naganabu's army several times, suddenly received bad news. The grain of the rear army had been stolen by Fukada Tani's 50,000 weak troops. How is this possible? When he first heard the news, Mari Regularization's face was full of disbelief. He did not believe that this army that was about to be abandoned still had such ability. Not only did they dare to make a move against him, but they could also really achieve their goal. However, no matter how much he did not believe it, the facts were right there. The news of the grain being stolen came one after another. There was even news of casualties. It was said that Fukada Tani's 50,000 weak troops were as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They displayed 120% of their strength and relied on numbers to defeat the elite Japanese army that was protecting the grain. In particular, these weak troops did not play by the rules at all. When they appeared, they swarmed like bees. When they attacked, they did not differentiate between the primary and secondary. It was completely chaotic. This made it so that even if one wanted to defend, they did not know how to defend. In any case, the grain being stolen and the loss of more than 3,000 soldiers was an irrefutable fact. Faced with the loss of the grain, Mari Regularization had no choice but to suppress the decision to continue attacking Sensei Naganabu. He turned around and retreated. While reuniting with the rear army, he asked the Supreme General for help and grain. Fukada Tani's sudden attack had caught Ashikaga Yoshimasa off guard. Originally, this was a gift that he had prepared for Ping and Beijing. He did not expect that he would shoot himself in the foot. This made him so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. If it wasn't for the fact that the destruction of the flat well field was right in front of him, he would have led his army back and killed Fukada Tani. Chapter 11-13. When the news came, Yang Chendong breathed a sigh of relief. With the addition of this chaotic army, it was enough to make Ashikaga Yoshimasa suffer. Taking this opportunity, he turned his attention to the Battle of Nanhai Province. The attack on Ge Prefecture, which was close to Ping and Beijing, had already begun. With the new army commander Su He taking the lead, they were naturally victorious. Yang Chendong didn't need to worry about anything. He was more concerned about the Battle of Awaju Island and the reaction of the more than 300,000 Japanese naval division in Nanhai Province. Yang Chendong had set a 20-word policy for Nanhai Province's attack. The cavalry would attack the Vietnamese line, the navy would attack Awaju Island, the two sectors would be scorched earth, and Nanhai Province would be surrounded but not attacked. The first two sentences had already been completed, and the third sentence was also implemented in Shanin Province and Nanhai Province, which were adjacent to Nanhai Province. They would ensure that no civilians or grain would be seen within 50 li of the coast. The isolation of Nanhai Province's Japanese naval division was already very obvious. And if the Japanese army dared to enter within 50 li of the coast, the elite forces of the Cold Front, the extremely fast Cold 4th Division riding bicycles would teach them a lesson. After all, the Japanese Empire's territory was still a bit small. The good thing was that it wasn't that difficult to defend. If it was the Great Ming Dynasty's coastline, not to mention one Cold Front Division, even two Cold Front Divisions would be far from enough. The scorched earth work was completed. Next, it was time to see how long the Japanese army in Nanhai Province could last. Once the time was right, the C-4th Division and C-5th Division guarding this area would immediately launch an attack and take their lives. Of course, to achieve this result, it was far from something that could be done overnight. Right now, the main task was to attack Awaju Island. If they could successfully occupy this island, not only would they be able to completely isolate the Japanese naval division in Nanhai province, but they would also be able to withdraw most of their forces to attack Ge Prefecture. Thus, they could achieve the goal of ensuring the safety of Ping and Beijing. On Awaju Island. Under the gaze of Yang Qindong, the commander of the 1st Division, Su Kuda, who was in charge of leading the troops, also tried his best to perform. 30 to 50,000 veterans were already a very powerful force to begin with. In addition, they had the support of the cavalry division of the new 3 armies, as well as the support of the 3 divisions. After they had landed on the Korean Navy's transport ships, they were able to display a very powerful force. The 50,000 Japanese soldiers were completely caught off guard and were forced to retreat again and again. Getting a good start didn't mean getting the final victory. On the battlefield, there were many examples of people who won first and then lost. Relying on their understanding of the terrain, as well as the rapid recruitment of new soldiers from the common people, the Japanese army on Awaji Island went from retreating step by step to standing on equal footing with the 5-star army. This was within Yang Qindong's expectations. According to the intelligence analysis of the Security Bureau and the CIA, the Navy was one of the most capable forces in the Japanese Empire. Perhaps they were rarely involved in civil wars, allowing them to maintain a detached attitude. Because of this, they had more time to train. If it weren't for the fact that their weapons and equipment were far inferior, even the 5-star army's navy wouldn't be able to gain any advantage over them. How could such an army be annihilated so easily? It was normal for them to be in a stalemate. Yang Qindong also knew that such a situation would not last long. After all, Awadai Island was now an isolated island. Without any reinforcements, it was only a matter of time before their morale crumbled. That would be the end of their army. Everything was within his expectations, and Yang Qindong's originally nervous heart relaxed a lot. This could be seen from the fact that he had been coming out of the palace recently. Instead of staying in the palace, Yang Qindong had to walk around. He wanted to see the situation in Neon from his own perspective, especially the life of the people at the bottom. He wanted to know what they needed and what they hoped for. After understanding all this, he knew what to do to completely solve the problem here. Yang Qindong didn't know that everything he did was being watched by someone. It was the intelligence personnel left behind by the general's forces in Ping and Beijing. They received the latest order to keep a close eye on King Wunan of Damyang's every move. If this person stayed in the palace, they had to know the situation of the palace's defense and the time of the guard's shift change. From this point of view, in order to kill Yang Qindong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa must have been prepared to storm the palace. What the intelligence personnel left behind didn't expect was that the King Wunan of Damyang actually took the initiative to come out. Although there were many guards accompanying him, more than 200 each time, it was not as safe as staying in the palace. A few days later, Yamaguchi Fukada, the general's favorite, the captain of the samurai team, appeared. This also indicated that it was time to start the assassination plan against Yang Qindong. There were also 600 elite samurai with Yamaguchi Fukada. This was also thanks to Yang Qindong's policy towards the Japanese Empire. Since Ping and Beijing was occupied by him, except for the first half of the month when the city gate was closed and people were arrested and searched for, the rest of the time the city gate was opened wide, as if it was welcoming guests from all over the world. There were even immigration counters on the streets of Ping and Beijing. The general idea was to give the people of the Japanese Empire who wanted to be safe and live an ordinary life a way out. After all, the Japanese Empire was in internal strife, and the people who suffered the most would always be the people. Unlike those ambitious warlords, many people were still willing to live on the land in front of them. Once the immigration counters were opened, a large number of people signed up every day. Many of them had heard the news and came from nearby cities, or even farther places. The 600 elite samurai were mixed in with these people. They were dressed like ordinary people and sneaked into Ping and Beijing. It was so easy to enter Ping and Beijing, which made Yamaguchi Fukada more confident about the completion of this mission. He had brought 600 elite samurai, which was almost all of his strength. It was not impossible for him to storm the palace if he was prepared, not to mention assassinating Yang Chendong outside the palace. He was full of confidence. Fukada Tani, who was originally attacking Ping and Beijing, had taken the Maori regularization's ass. Yang Chendong seemed to have completely forgotten about the so-called safety. Every day after breakfast, he would start to visit the streets. These days, he even directly left Kyoto and began to wander in the nearby mountains and forests. He gave people the feeling that he was on a scenic tour, but he did not bring Princess Junko with him, which inevitably made people suspicious. Some intelligence personnel of the Japanese Empire thought that King Wunan of Daimyong was waiting for something, and that he should have known that someone was going to assassinate him. Regarding this, Yamaguchi Fukada naturally had a face full of disbelief. The assassination of Yang Chendong was extremely secret. Even the 600 samurai under his command only knew that they were going to carry out the mission, but they did not know the details of the mission. How could King Wunan of Daimyong know? It was clear that these people were scaring themselves and were scared by Yang Chendong. Yamaguchi Fukada had decided to act alone. With 600 samurai, even if they were prepared, what could they do? They could even kill him with a crowd of people. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong was not doing any seductive actions, nor was he setting up a trap for people to fall into. The reason why he had been wandering around the nearby mountains was because of the underground mines. The Japanese Empire was an island country. Due to the geological structure and volcanic rocks, there were very few mountains. However, in these mountains, there were relatively large reserves of coal, limestone, sulfur, copper, bismuth, and other minerals. The main reason why he appeared near Ping and Beijing was not because of these, but because he knew that there was a silver mountain nearby. This was also the main reason why the Japanese Empire was able to develop in the later period. He came to find the exact location of this place. Speaking of which, he still had to thank Yang Chendong for his previous life. When he was carrying out a mission here under the name of Yang Dong, he happened to hear from a local old man that there used to be a silver mountain here hundreds of years ago. The silver content was very high and very pure. That was God's longing for the people of the Japanese Empire. In fact, he was a little curious, so he asked some people and confirmed the authenticity of this matter. Now that he had returned to hundreds of years ago and came to this place, how could he let go of the silver mountain? Yang Xie's development was too fast. His own ability to produce blood was not bad, but he still felt a little stretched. Although he found a few silver mountains on the island of the Great F country, it had greatly alleviated all kinds of economic pressure. But then again, who would complain about having too much money? These days, Yang Chendong suddenly thought of this matter. Every day, he wandered around the nearby mountains to determine which mountain was his target. After a few days of hard work, he finally determined that his final target was the 3 mountains in front of him. Later, as long as he sent people to dig and develop, there would be a surprise waiting for him. After many days of hard work, there was finally a good result. Yang Chendong could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then, from a distance behind him, there were sounds of fighting and yelling. Then, Beta Persei talked to a Long Wei who ran from afar for a while, then returned to Yang Chendong's side and said, "Young master, someone wanted to assassinate you, but was discovered by Long Wei outside and suppressed with the 95 style. Want to kill me?" Yang Chendong was stunned when he heard this, then he smiled. He now appeared as an invader. Although it was for the sake of the 8th Madam Princess Junko, it also broke the original balance here. It was normal for someone to want to kill him. Since they could force Long Wei to use the 95 style, needless to say, the other party's background was not small. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. Yang Chendong asked again, "Do you know who came?" Chapter 11:14. I'll send someone to check it out. Beta Persei turned around and left. After a while, he took the 2 Long Wei soldiers and ran towards the direction where the gunshots came from. In that direction, Yamaguchi Fukada was smashing the ground with his fist. Some stones were smashed to pieces under the huge force, but he didn't seem to feel it at all. Samurai are different from ninjas. They can use the things around them, plus their own flexibility and speed, etc., to hide their body and achieve the effect of approaching the target at the closest distance. This way, they are better at assassination. In contrast, samurai's combat power is more powerful, but they are only strong in normal combat power. Every time they want to get close to the target, they have to make some big noise. Just like now, as soon as they made their decision, they were spotted by the dragon guards who were in charge of the outer perimeter security. After a failed warning, the dragon guards immediately opened fire. The dozens of warriors who were charging at the front were shot dead on the ground amidst the battle cries. The distance was at least 300 meters. The death of the samurai frightened Yamaguchi Fukada. He was forced to let the other samurai lie on the ground and try not to expose his body as much as possible. But at the same time, he was furious. This kind of opponent that he couldn't reach at all made him feel powerless. Under such a feeling, how could he be in a good mood? "Captain, let's retreat. The guns in their hands are too powerful, and they can fire continuously. If we rush up, we will only die." A samurai captain, who is also Yamaguchi Fukada's trusted aide, crawled to his side and said, "Should we retreat?" Yamaguchi Fukada was unwilling. This time, their appearance was so sudden, but they couldn't get close to the target. They didn't even see Yang Chendong's true appearance. If they give up such an opportunity, it can be imagined that it will be even more difficult to assassinate him in the future. But if they don't retreat now, what's the difference between lying here and waiting for death? Once more time passed and more 5-star soldiers appeared. Wouldn't it be impossible for him to retreat even if he wanted to? For the sake of his subordinate's safety, Yamaguchi Fukada finally made the decision to retreat and look for an opportunity. At this moment, he realized that the 5-star army had started to retreat. What's going on? Yamaguchi Fukada was puzzled at first, but then he thought of something and laughed. "I know, it must be because the other party's guns are out of gunpowder, or they are running out of gunpowder. Otherwise, why would they retreat when they have the upper hand?" Yamaguchi Fukada, who felt that he knew the truth, was filled with energy again. After a loud shout, he ordered his warriors to get up and charge forward. However, for the sake of safety, only a few dozen warriors stood up this time. They were also guarding against the enemy's muskets and didn't want to suffer too many losses. The few dozen warriors stood up and waved their katanas as they charged forward. The 5-star army on the other side was indeed only retreating. They only occasionally fired a shot or two, but they were far less concentrated and confident than before. Yamaguchi Fukada saw all of this and was very excited. With loud shouts, the warriors under his command all stood up and charged forward in a frenzy. Yang Chendong was standing in an open space at the foot of the mountain. On his left and right were 100 Longwei soldiers. At this moment, they were all holding the 95 style in their hands and stood proudly. In front of them, the 50 Longwei soldiers who were in charge of the periphery were quickly retreating. When they retreated to Yang Chendong's side, the person in charge, Peng Yu, laughed and took the initiative to say, "Sixth young master, the mission to lure the enemy has been successfully completed." "Very good." Yang Chendong nodded with a smirk on his face. Of course, the retreat this time was not caused by a lack of bullets. After the assassination in Baiming's Kyoto Yongding Gate, the Longwei soldiers were fully equipped with bullets when they went out with Yang Chendong. 200 people could easily deal with an enemy 10 times their number, not to mention that this time they were facing an enemy 3 times their number. How could they not have enough bullets? However, he still made a move to retreat in order to eliminate all of them. Once they escaped and returned to Ping and City, they would be the biggest threat to his safety. Yamaguchi Fukada didn't know that when he saw that the enemy only had a few hundred people, which was a quarter of his forces, he couldn't help but want to look up to the sky and sigh. This was an opportunity given to them by the heavens. When the distance between the two sides was only 200 meters, Yamaguchi Fukada led the samurais closer step by step with a determined look on his face. Their speed was very fast. 180 meters, 150 meters. Soon, it was 120 meters. At this distance, those who had some strength could shoot with a strong bow. Finally, the Longwei soldiers raised their lowered muzzles one by one. With Beta Persei's order, bursts of fire spewed out from the muzzles and fell on the samurais opposite them one by one, forming little blood flowers. These were blood flowers, not snowflakes. With the appearance and production of these blood flowers, the samurais fell one after another in the process of charging. After several waves of attack, there were less than 200 people left in the team of nearly 600 people. Such a fast death rate made Yamaguchi Fukada's heart bleed after seeing it. This was the result of many years of hard work to train these 600 elites, but now, they died one by one without even touching the opponent's clothes or seeing the opponent's appearance clearly. This result was unacceptable. You guys retreat, the rest of you, charge with me. In order to leave a seed of hope for the samurais, Yamaguchi Fukada gritted his teeth and issued an order, forcing a team of 50 people to retreat, while he himself still resolutely rushed forward. Even if he was going to die, he wanted to die while charging forward. This was the only way to not disgrace the spirit of the samurai. But what happened next made Yamaguchi Fukada have the urge to vomit blood again. Just behind them, when the 50 samurais that he regarded as seeds turned around, 50 Longwei members suddenly appeared behind them. These 50 people came in a roundabout way after the battle started, with the idea of completely wiping out the enemy. Under the leadership of Yamaguchi Fukada, the 50 people fired their guns, as if they were practicing shooting. The difference was that they were shooting at targets during training, but now they were shooting at real enemies. 50 against 50, the battle ended very quickly. After hearing the gunshots and turning his head, Yamaguchi Fukada saw the scene of all the retreating members dying. At this time, there were less than 10 samurais standing beside him, and this was because the Longwei members showed mercy and did not continue to use them as targets. Otherwise, none of them would have survived. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 80 meters. At a distance of 80 meters, the 95 style still had the advantage and completely controlled the situation. Beta Persei finally said, "You guys, surrender." Beta Persei shouted this sentence in Japanese. Although it was a little awkward, it was enough for the other party to understand what he said. Surrender? Yamaguchi Fukada's crazy face was constantly twisted. There was nothing more humiliating than surrendering to a samurai. Ninjas could surrender, but samurais could not. This had a lot to do with the requirements of their daily training and education. At this moment, Yamaguchi Fukada first shook his head, then shouted with all his strength, "I've heard that the 5-star Army's warriors are all good at fighting, but I don't know if you dare to fight with us in close combat and let us see your methods and abilities." This kind of scene often happened in later generations of TV dramas. Often, when the villain said this sentence, the omnipotent main character would appear. He would either hold a large sword or a red spear and go into battle alone. With just a few answers, he would be able to kill several Woku pirates. It was a very satisfying scene. But that was just a TV effect. In reality, no one would do that. Was it fun to take the risk? Moreover, when the pirates were surrounded by Han people, how many of them would choose to fight you one-on-one? Wouldn't they swarm you or shoot you to end your opponent's life? Idiot. Listening to Yamaguchi Fukada's challenge, Yang Chendong slightly opened his mouth and spat out these two words. Beta Persei, who had been by his side for a long time, already knew what kind of personality the young master had. He also smiled. This idiot in his ears was like an order to open fire. He first raised his right arm high, then quickly lowered it, bringing with it a burst of gunfire. Poor Yamaguchi Fukada, in the end, didn't even touch the corner of a Longwei's clothes. He was shot several times and died. Even when he died, his eyes were still wide open, as if he died with a grievance. After the investigation, a total of 603 corpses were found, including 2 intelligence personnel from the Japanese Empire. Yang Chendong casually ordered people to dig a big hole and bury them. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a very sharp knife in his eyes. In the eyes of many people in the Japanese Empire, they represented a very powerful existence. They were not in Yang Chendong's eyes at all. They were just countless assassins who wanted to kill him, but in the end, they were killed instead. Yang Qindong really didn't have the slightest interest in them. Because this incident happened outside the city, it didn't attract any attention. Only some high-level members of the 5-star army knew about it. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had just returned from the Shanin Road, was fortunate enough to know about this news. His face was full of shock and stupefaction. For a long time, ninjas and samurai were like two life-and-death enemies. They became the two sharp swords in the hands of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. No one could stop them as long as they pointed at them. Chapter 11:15. But now, the ninjas surrendered to the 5-star army, and all the samurai were killed. This result shocked Matsumoto Kazuma, but it also strengthened his determination to be loyal to Yang Qindong. This master was too powerful, so powerful that even a little bit of resistance was a sin. In the face of such a person, it was best to be obedient. Perhaps the ninjas could be carried forward under his leadership. As for his old enemy, Yamaguchi Fukada, he died without a trace. He couldn't say whether he was happy or disappointed. Because anyone who became an enemy of Yang Qindong would end up like this. The only difference was that it was sooner or later. Matsumoto Kazuma didn't feel anything. Yang Qindong wasn't a person who didn't fight back. Although Yamaguchi Fukada's appearance didn't threaten his safety, it didn't even have the qualifications to be scared. But this person was sent by Ashikaga Yoshimasa to assassinate him. Just based on this, he must return the favor. Matsumoto Kazuma was once again ordered to come to the Imperial Palace, and received a mission here to assassinate Ashikaga Yoshimasa. According to Yang Qindong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was the most powerful general in the Japanese Empire. He had once forced the emperor to a dead end. He must be heavily guarded, and it wouldn't be easy to kill him. But it didn't matter. Even if he couldn't kill him, he still needed to scare him. If he couldn't kill him, then he would kill some people who were close to him. As for who these people were, presumably Matsumoto Kazuma, who had been important by his side, would be very clear. 20 heads. If we can't kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa, then we'll take the heads of 20 of his trusted subordinates. I want to let people know that if they want to kill me, they will have to pay a heavy price. 110 is not enough, 120 is barely enough. This was Yang Qindong's original words to Matsumoto Kazuma. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had completely surrendered, not only didn't have the slightest difficulty, but also used this mission as an opportunity to show off his achievements and prove his strength. He personally led Suzuki, 10 jonin and 30 chunin to send out the mission, proving their determination to complete this mission. Yang Qindong, who sent out this mission, turned his head as if nothing had happened. He sent a report to Yu Qian, asking him to arrange mining personnel to come to the Japanese Empire. Then he focused his attention on the campaign to conquer Nankado. The war in the Jianghu prefecture was as difficult as he expected. The soldiers and civilians of the Japanese Empire on the island resisted with all their strength. As an important stronghold of the Japanese Naval Division, the people here lived a good life. They were rarely affected by the war. After encountering the invasion of the 5-star army, in order to protect their power, they naturally resisted with all their strength. And because of the participation of the people, the enemy was developing more and more. Fortunately, the commander of the new army, Suhi, took these factors into consideration before leaving, and barely managed to maintain the situation. When the reinforcements appear, it's time to counterattack with all their strength. Compared to the stalemate in the Jianghu prefecture, the attack in the Awaju island became smoother and smoother. Although the initial resistance was fierce, as the 1st Reserve Division got used to the battlefield environment and exerted all their strength, the Japanese army in the Awaju island, without any outside help, finally showed signs of defeat and continued to expand. Finally, after 12 days of resistance, the main force was destroyed, and the rest were captured. The flag of the 5-star army was planted in the Awaju island, which meant that the South Island had completely become an isolated city without any support. If they want to escape, they have to go through the artillery fire of the C4 Division and the C5 Division patrolling the surrounding waters. After suffering heavy losses in several consecutive attacks, they finally became well-behaved. After successfully capturing the Awaju Island, according to the previous plan, the defense of the island was handed over to the E-1st Division. He himself took the 1st Reserve Division and a division of cavalry back to the Jianghu Prefecture by transport ship and dealt with the remaining Japanese army together with Commander Suhi. Compared to the 5-star army, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's situation became more and more difficult. Although the opposing forces in the flat well field had gradually lost their survival space under his suppression, the sudden appearance of ninja killers still gave the Supreme General a great headache. Fortunately, with the protection of the Divine Archery Battalion, plus the protection of the always cautious guards, he didn't get killed by the ninjas, but following that, his trusted subordinates were constantly killed. In just a few days, more than a dozen of his trusted subordinates had died, and it seemed that the ninjas didn't have any intention of stopping. Yamaguchi Fukada's samurai brigade had been missing for a long time, and Ashikaga Yoshimasa had reason to suspect that they had been completely wiped out. The appearance of these ninja killers also proved his guess. This was simply a revenge and targeting method implemented by the King Wunan of Daimyong. Originally, it was him who made the first move. Was there anything wrong with the other party giving him a taste of his own medicine? He just hoped that these ninjas would leave quickly, so that he could restore the stability under his rule. Finally, the 20 heads of the ministers were gathered together, and the ninjas suddenly disappeared without a trace as if they had come. Ashikaga Yoshimasa felt that the wind had passed, and at the same time, he ordered the army to go down north, and launched the final attack on the flat well field that had less than 10,000 soldiers. The flat well field was the minister that the emperor relied on, and he rose up after Princess Junko announced to the world that Ashikaga Yoshimasa had committed a crime. Logically speaking, even if he wasn't Yang Chendong's ally, he wouldn't be his enemy. But Yang Chendong didn't have a good impression of this person. Since you have so much power, why didn't you stand in front of the emperor earlier? If you did that, how could Ashikaga Yoshimasa be the dominant force? You didn't do that, but stood out after the death of the emperor and claimed to be righteous. This kind of person was clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. Yang Chendong didn't have the heart to pay attention to such a person, and allowed him to slowly weaken under the powerful attacks of the Grand General until he disappeared. Yang Chendong had never been interested in the internal strife of the Japanese Empire. He was constantly accumulating his strength, waiting for the grand battle with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. At that time, the entire Japanese Empire would be decided. For the sake of this day, the foreign divisions formed by the various provinces were sent to Wanation by the Navy's transport ships. The appearance of the foreign 4th Division, the foreign 5th Division, and the foreign 6th Division made the chips in Yang Chendong's hands even heavier. In the 8th month of 1458 AD, 8 months after Yang Chendong arrived in the Japanese Empire, Ashikaga Yoshimasa finally dealt with the biggest opposition to him, the flat well field, and killed him in the midst of the chaos. Then, he began to mobilize his troops, looking as if he was going to head straight for Ping and Beijing. A great battle to determine the ultimate leadership of the Japanese Empire was about to begin. After Flatwell Field was killed, the Grand General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had successfully taken over the Hokuriku province, quickly received a letter of surrender from the ruler of the northernmost Hokuriku province. At this point, he became the new king of the Japanese Empire. If it wasn't for the sudden intervention of the 5-star army, his power would have far surpassed that of the deceased emperor. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had reorganized the army left behind by Hireda's death, and recruited a lot of new troops from the local area. His army had reached a total of 500,000 men, and he led his army down south, heading straight for Heian City. From his point of view, it was time to settle the grudge between him and Yang Chendong. The Awaji Island and Ge Prefecture had already been taken by Yang Chendong, and only Nankado was not in his hands. However, that didn't matter anymore. With the C-4th Division and C-5th Division keeping an eye on that place, and with the absolute advantage of the high-tech artillery, the other side had no chance of escaping. Without any support, and even with the supply of food and water completely cut off, how long could the 300,000 Japanese army in Nankado last? Yang Chendong was also curious. Of course, now was not the time to think about these things. The Grand General had already led the main forces to head down. How to stop the enemy's attack was the problem that needed to be considered now. There was also news from the mountain shade. The local force Sensei Naganabu that he supported had finally lost to the 100,000 elite troops of the Maori regularization. Originally, Xianxia's sudden attack, after snatching the rations of Maori Zheng's 100,000-strong army, had indeed foiled the enemy's original plan, forcing them to turn back. However, elites were elites. When the Maori regularization, with the support of the Grand General, regained the provisions, the two sides fought a bloody battle. It could not even be called a bloody battle. After a slight resistance, Fukada Tani's troops were defeated. If not for Sensei Naganabu's timely arrival, he would have died. The Maori regularization was worthy of being the Grand General's #1 fierce general. Even in the face of the joint forces of Sensei Naganabu and Fukada Tani, he did not have the slightest fear. Instead, he ordered a fierce attack. In the end, after a standoff of 12 hours, Sensei Naganabu, who had allied with the Maori regularization, was disappointed to find that some of his allies had left him. The actions of his allies caused Sensei Naganabu to lose their support. In the end, they had no choice but to retreat regretfully. Because of this, the Maori regularization had taken over half of the mountain shade. They had seized countless provisions and people, greatly increasing their own strength. At the same time, it had also increased the difficulty of Yang Qindong's conquest of the Japanese Empire. Outside Ping and Beijing, the mountain shades Danbo Prefecture, the Dongshan Prefecture's Jinjiang Prefecture, and the Donghai Prefecture's Iga region were all filled with flags and military tents. From a distance, it looked like there was no end to it. It looked like they were going to rush up and tear apart Ping and Beijing. In the palace of Ping and Beijing, Yang Qindong was not aware that he was surrounded. On the contrary, he had a relaxed expression on his face. At this moment, he was looking at the subordinates who had followed him. The 1st Cavalry Division's commander Tian Hu, the 4th Army Division's commander Ling Daqiang, the 7th Army's commander Tian Su, the New Army's commander Su He, the 1st Reserve Division's commander Su Da, as well as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Division's commanders were all present. Behind them were the 5-star Army's 220,000 soldiers. Compared to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's 600,000 soldiers, this was a small number. However, compared to the 5-star Army, this was already a considerable force. Chapter 11:16. Apart from a few foreign tribes, the rest were all elite soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. Among them were the Leng Feng Division, the Lu 4th Division, and the Lu 7th Division, who were all armed with firearms. And all these people were gathered together just to defend the peace capital, so Yang Qindong really didn't feel any pressure. Of course, if it was just to defend the city, these troops were naturally enough. But Yang Qindong didn't just want that. He wanted to conquer the entire Japanese Empire. Especially when Beiming boasted of its wings and gradually began to show its fangs, the pressure on the new 1st Army and the new 2nd Army on the grassland was increasing day by day. If the problem couldn't be solved, unpredictable things would happen at any time. Beiming's development over the years, especially since the mobilization of the entire army, had risen to 4 million troops. Just this huge number alone was enough to have a deterrent effect. Against them, even Yang Qindong didn't have the confidence to win. Ants could bite an elephant to death. It wasn't just a saying. Therefore, in the eyes of others, Yang Qindong, who should be defending Ping and Beijing, had decided to launch a counterattack. He wanted to eliminate the main force of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, so as to quickly get out of the quagmire of war in the Japanese Empire. The war in the Japanese Empire had been going on for 8 months. Compared to taking down the Golden Border dynasty in 30 days and taking down the other Southeast Asian countries in 2 or 3 months, the delay here was really too long. The longer the war dragged on, the greater the investment, and the greater the pressure on money and food. This was naturally not a good thing for young Xia, who was still in the development period. Even if it was to solve the pressure in other aspects, the war here should be over. The people present at the meeting were all the troops Yang Chendong had to attack the Japanese Empire. Yes, at this moment, he couldn't find any more reinforcements. Although the 5-star army was strong and had developed over the years, their military strength wasn't too little. However, they had occupied too much territory and there were too many places that needed to be guarded. These 200,000 plus soldiers were already the majority of Yang Chendong's mobile forces. When Yang Chendong's gaze landed on the generals, everyone's gaze also converged on him. Upon closer inspection, one could see that their breathing was slightly rapid. Clearly, they had also guessed the theme of this meeting. They knew that the war was about to begin, and that the time to make a great contribution had come. Compared to the nervousness in the hearts of the generals, Yang Chendong was extremely relaxed. The reason why he made this decision was because of Ditsang. Yang Xie's growth today was all thanks to Okura. From small daily necessities to big guns and cannons, Yang Xie earned a lot of money and expanded his power. Advanced technology and weapons that were hundreds of years old were the key for Yang Chendong to become stronger and achieve his great goals. This time, with 200,000 plus soldiers against 600,000, Yang Chendong also had to rely on Okura's strength. A completely feasible plan was already in his mind. Now, all he had to do was to realize it and set the foundation for conquering the entire Japanese empire. Are you all very excited? After a moment of silence, Yang Chendong's voice finally rang out. When it reached the ears of the generals, they couldn't help but laugh. Yes, this is indeed a good time for you to make a contribution. This battle will also be our victory, a moment that will forever be remembered in history. Is everyone ready? When Yang Chendong's voice resounded through the entire imperial palace, all the generals replied in unison, "Be ready at all times." Very good. Satisfied with everyone's answer, Yang Chendong once again said in a clear voice, "Generals, listen up." At the same time, in the Japanese army's camp, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also holding a military meeting. Many of his subordinates stood on both sides, waiting for the general to make a strategic decision. Their military strength was almost 3 times that of the 5-star armies. They were also very familiar with the terrain and had the support of millions of Japanese Empire's citizens. Ashikaga Yoshimasa couldn't see any possibility of failure. At one point, he even thought that the 5-star army was able to conquer Ping and Beijing because they took advantage of a loophole. If it wasn't for the internal strife that was too serious, how could the 5-star army achieve such results? Yes, the 5-star army had powerful firearms, and their power was very great. However, when facing the charge of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, firearms could only play a supporting role. In the end, it still depended on the strength of the soldiers. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a history of small guns and rifles defeating cannons and machine guns. Besides, the Japanese Empire didn't have any firearms at all. They also had some ordinary red coat cannons, about 100 of them. These were the ones that Ashikaga Yoshimasa took the initiative to submit to Beiming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, and were transported by sea. As for ordinary firearms, they also had about 5,000 of them. Although they were far inferior to Leng Feng's Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, they could still fire up to a few hundred meters away, which could boost the morale of the soldiers. The most important thing was that they had enough military strength and the support of the citizens. This was also where the general's confidence came from. Other than the Northern Land Road, which was affected by the war, the grain fields of Donghai Road, especially the Dongshan Road, which was the largest area, were almost unaffected. With enough food, even if they faced the 5-star army for a few years, they could still hold on. Compared to the 5-star army, who had to rely on sea transportation for all their food and drink, they already had a natural advantage. With such confidence, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was sitting at the head of the table, had a smile on his face throughout the meeting. In the end, after everyone's discussion, they came up with a final battle plan, which was to use a protracted war, using attrition as the main strategy. In the end, they would force the 5-star army to retreat from the Japanese Empire and achieve their goal of independence. Doesn't the 5-star army have cannons? Moreover, they can fire up to a distance of 13 miles. Good, then our general's tent will be 13 miles away, maintaining a safe distance from you. As long as the general is fine, the front line won't collapse. They wanted to see how many cannons the 5-star army had, how many cannons they had, how many cannons they had, and how many cannons they had. Just from this point alone, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's mind was still very clear. At least, he didn't choose to attack Ping and Beijing. Otherwise, with a strong city and powerful cannons, he would be the one at a disadvantage. However, if it was a confrontation, then it would be completely different. Especially since Beiming had sent news that they were about to encircle and annihilate the 5-star army on the grasslands. As long as they could hold the 5-star army's main force here, once the grasslands fell, their minds would be in chaos. At that time, it would be time for them to retreat without fighting. With the help of their allies, they only needed to continue the confrontation. Holding the 5-star army's main force would be a great achievement. What was there to be afraid of? After the meeting, the generals returned to their respective camps. A large net was spread out, and it was as if they were in a confrontation. At the same time, all the generals' tents were moved to a place 15 miles away from Ping and Beijing to ensure that nothing would go wrong. The movements of the Japanese army were collected by the intelligence department and sent to Yang Qindong. Looking at the result that was as he expected, Yang Qindong only sneered. In his heart, he thought, who told you that the 5-star army's cannons can only fire up to a range of 13 miles? The so-called 100mm mortar was only used by the Cold Vanguard Army because it was convenient to carry around. In the warehouse, who knew how many powerful cannons were not taken out? For example, the Type 86 122mm howitzer. The Type 86 122mm howitzer was based on the Soviet Union's D-30 122mm howitzer. According to the needs of modern warfare, the Type 86 122mm howitzer was developed in 1985 to replace the old Type 54 and 54-1 or 122mm howitzer. The Type 86 122mm howitzer's barrel was longer, and it was 30 times the caliber. It weighed 3.2 tons and had a firing rate of 6 to 8 rounds per minute. It had a 360 degrees firing range. It could use anti-personnel grenades, armor-piercing bullets, extended-range bullets, smoke bombs, flares, anti-armor shrapnel and many other types of ammunition. The range of normal shells was 18 kilometers, and the range of concave extended-range bullets was 21 kilometers. The Type 86 used anti-armor shrapnel that contained 30 bullets. It had an armor-piercing thickness of 500 millimeters and a maximum range of 15 kilometers. Compared to other types of howitzers, the Type W86 structure was compact, easy to operate, long range, high accuracy, simple manufacturing, and low cost. It could be said that it caught up with the world's advanced standards. Especially the Type 86's 360 degrees firing range and long range, it was second to none in the world. The range of the Type W86 was 15 kilometers, which was twice the range of the 100mm howitzer. It could definitely catch the enemy off guard. In Ping and Beijing's national treasury, there was a 122mm howitzer. As to when it appeared and why it appeared, no one knew. However, they knew that it was very powerful. At this point, it had to be said that Yang Qindong had set up a persona for himself. He rarely explained anything that was taken out of the warehouse. At first, some people were curious about where the things came from. Beta Persei had also made mistakes in this regard. He even chased after Yang Qindong for an answer. The answer was that he did not get any answer and was even arranged to train in the army. This scared Beta Persei. He was not afraid of hardships as a soldier, but he was afraid that he would lose his identity as a Yang family servant. After training for a while, he returned to Yang Qindong's side and kept his mouth shut. He knew what to ask and what not to ask. Even Beta Persei was like this. It could be imagined that other people would not dare to ask so many questions. Because of this, Yang Qindong became even more mysterious. When the 122mm howitzer appeared in front of several generals, they were inevitably shocked. Some of them had heard some news that there were some powerful cannons being developed in the arsenal of Xichen City, but no one had seen what it looked like. Now that they finally had the opportunity to feast their eyes, they were naturally surprised and excited. Chapter 11-17. Sixth Young Master, can we touch it? Commander Ling Si, Ling Dechang, asked excitedly and nervously. As the commander in charge of the firearms division, he had a natural affinity for firearms. When he saw the powerful cannon, he was as excited as a cavalry seeing a good horse. Commander Ling Chi's face was also filled with excitement, but at the same time, he was also very nervous, afraid that Yang Chendong would reject him. Fortunately, Yang Chendong nodded with a smile. Of course, this thing isn't made of paper. It won't break. This sentence also caused the crowd to burst into laughter. Then, everyone walked up and touched the metal thing that was rumored to be powerful. Even the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tianhu, looked at it curiously. In the era of cold weapons, cavalry was already a very powerful existence. The Mongol Empire was the one who used them to the extreme, and they had once conquered a huge piece of land. It wasn't until firearms appeared that cavalry went from glory to decline. Based on this, Tianhu shouldn't like firearms. Just like the commander of the new army, Su He, who led a cavalry division, he obviously didn't like firearms. He thought that the appearance of firearms suppressed the development of cavalry. As a student of the Yang Family Academy, Tianhu didn't think this way. Or rather, he didn't like it, but his rationality told him that the situation was irreversible. Since that was the case, it was better to learn more and accept new things and new technology so that they wouldn't be eliminated by society. After a quarter of an hour, the entire body of the 122mm howitzer had been touched by everyone. Yang Chendong said, "You've seen the cannon. Next, it's up to you guys to see how you perform. In short, you must find Ashikaga Yoshimasa's main tent. Only then can the power of the cannon be maximized and it's time for us to counterattack." Understood. When it came to serious matters, all the generals became serious and replied in unison. Yes, Yang Chendong's plan was to capture the ringleader first. As long as they could bombard Ashikaga Yoshimasa, without a leader, the next battle would be easy. Speaking of which, this wasn't the first time Ashikaga Yoshimasa was threatened by cannons. When the emperor was still alive, he had bought the Type 59-1 130mm cannon from the 5-star army through his daughter, Princess Junko. This cannon had a longer range than the Type 122mm howitzer, and he had spent a total of 10,000 to 20,000 taels of silver to buy it. It could be said that the emperor had used up all his money. The 122mm howitzer was only halfway to its target. This time, if it wanted to show off its power, it had to find Ashikaga Yoshimasa's specific location first. This matter could only be entrusted to the various generals, and the generals who already knew everything were all thinking about how to complete this mission and earn some merit. Outside Ping and Beijing, the 500,000-strong Japanese Empire's army stood in a continuous line. They maintained a distance of more than 10 li between the two sides, indicating that they were cautious and prepared. All the generals' tents had to be pushed back by 5 li to make it safer. However, as the great general, the commander-in-chief of the three armies, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's tent had to be pushed back by 5 li to make it safer. The distance of 25 li from the city gate made Ashikaga Yoshimasa's entire body feel safe. Especially when there were several fake main tents in the surroundings. Unless the high-ranking generals knew the inside story, it would be difficult to tell which one was the real main tent and which one was his shelter. Some people didn't think much of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's cautiousness and thought that it was a sign that he was afraid of the 5-star army. However, for the great general who had almost lost his life to the cannons, he believed that facing the 5-star army with their advanced cannons, no matter what he did, it wouldn't be too much. This was because he had personally witnessed the scene of the great general's mansion being razed to the ground. It could be said that he would never forget it. After suffering a loss, he had to remember it. This time, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had set up his main tent in front of the rear army. After the middle army, it was 25 li away from Ping and Beijing. Not only that, but he had also created several fake main tents to cover himself. He didn't believe that the 5-star army could do anything to him this time. In modern warfare, military headquarters were built very hidden. Even radar couldn't detect it. This was because they were worried that the enemy would directly lock onto them and kill them. Speaking of which, this was called being cautious. In comparison, although Ashikaga Yoshimasa had also made some preparations, his level was too low. As the director of the Japanese Empire's Intelligence Bureau, Guanxing had already made arrangements. He was just waiting for Ashikaga Yoshimasa to reveal his approximate location and report it through the radio. What the 5-star army needed to do was to force out Ashikaga Yoshimasa's exact location. As for how to do this, it wasn't difficult. They only needed to launch a large-scale attack. Once the enemy's formation was in chaos, the main tent with the most people would naturally be the target of their attack. It's up to you. On top of the North City Tower in Ping and Beijing, Yang Qindong, who was wearing a golden armor, looked at the generals below with bright eyes and spoke with confidence. Please rest assured, 6th young master. All the generals who led the troops were also very excited and replied with a firm expression. This time, only one regiment of the new army was left behind to take care of the daily security of Ping and Beijing, including the 5 foreign divisions. This showed Yang Qindong's great determination to destroy the Japanese Empire in one battle. No one would have thought that Yang Qindong would actually adopt a posture of attacking with all his troops when he was outnumbered. And it was precisely because of this that they were able to catch the enemy off guard and gather the enemy in one battle. Open the city gates. Yang Qindong ordered in a firm tone. Open the city gates. Beta Persei on the side shouted with his loud voice. Then, the thick and heavy city gates of Ping and Beijing were pushed open from the inside. The 2nd Division, who had been waiting here, was the first to rush out. The order in which they exited the city was based on the order of strength. First was the 5 foreign divisions, followed by the 1st Reserve Division, then the 4th Division and the 7th Army. Finally, the new army and the 1st Cavalry Division were the last to exit the city gates. The purpose of this was to ensure that when they launched an attack, their steps would be orderly. Otherwise, the cavalry would have already rushed out far away before the infantry behind them could catch up. This way, it wouldn't have the effect of shocking the enemy, nor would it create a powerful momentum. One by one, the 5-star army walked out of the city gates and approached the Japanese army on the battlefield. When this scene was seen by the scouts, they immediately reported it to the generals of the front army. After that, the news continued to be reported to the main tent at the rear. At the beginning of the first day, the Japanese army wasn't surprised to see the 5-star army send out troops. In their view, it was clear that the enemy couldn't hold back and wanted to send out troops to test them. They only needed to wait in place and wait for the enemy to be exhausted. If the other party was just testing them, they shouldn't launch any attacks. But if they launched an attack, they only needed to fight back. In the end, the initiative had always been in their hands. And as the 5-star army rushed out one after another, the number of people increased more and more. First, it was 20,000, 60,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 people. It was already far beyond their expectations. At this moment, some people finally couldn't hold back anymore. All kinds of reports and messengers quickly rushed back. No matter what kind of disguise they used before, when those messengers appeared one by one and gathered in the main tent, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's real location was completely exposed. There were 4 things that Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't expect. First, he didn't expect that after putting so much effort into disguising himself, it would be exposed so quickly. Second, he didn't expect that there were already some Japanese army soldiers around his main tent who had been bribed by the management. So when his position in the main tent was exposed, the news had already spread quickly. Third, he didn't expect that the 5-star army had already prepared a lethal weapon with an attack range of up to 30 miles. Fourth, he didn't expect that there would be something like a telegram, which could actually send a message thousands of miles away in an instant. All kinds of unexpected things made Ashikaga Yoshimasa meet the messengers one after another. Before he was ready to move his camp, a heavy whistling sound resounded in front of him. Then the first artillery shell fell from the sky and landed on the ground more than 10 meters away from his main tent. The destructive power of the 122mm howitzer is far from what the 100mm mortar can compare to. With just one shot, a huge pit of 3 meters deep was blown out. At the same time, the surrounding 20 to 30 meters were all affected by the aftermath. Among them was Ashikaga Yoshimasa. At the moment when the main tent was blown away, he was also injured by the aftermath of the artillery shell and fainted immediately. This was also because the guards around him were doing their duty. When the explosion happened, they instinctively protected him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been injured by the explosion, he might have been directly killed by the explosion. The war is about to begin, and as the commander-in-chief, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was actually injured by the explosion and fainted. It suddenly gave people a feeling that they were a group of dragons without a leader. The ones who suffered the most were the scouts sent by the various armies who were waiting for orders. Now that the commander-in-chief was unconscious, they didn't know what to do next. If they didn't have perfect cooperation and fought separately, wouldn't they be defeated one by one? Logically speaking, if the commander-in-chief wasn't here, the other vice-commander-in-chief could also stand up and take up the responsibility. It was Ashikaga Yoshimasa's fault for being used to holding power. He was afraid that others would covet his power. He did many things himself, so other than himself, most of the others were just decorations. They didn't have any authority. At this moment, it was impossible to pull out someone to take charge of the situation. Chapter 11:18. The other deputy commanders knew that it was useless to say anything now. They arranged for people to protect the unconscious Ashikaga Yoshimasa as they retreated. At the same time, they said to the scouts who had not been assigned to work, "Go back and tell your general to defend with all his might. Once the general's body gets better, he will immediately arrange for a counterattack." After they finished speaking, the people in the main tent began to quickly retreat. Needless to say, these people could already see that the situation was unfavorable. If they did not escape now, they would not have any chance to escape. The other scouts looked at each other, then helplessly shook their heads and left. The so-called words of the deputy commanders were not credible at all. What did they mean by defending with all their might? What should they do without a plan? Who would protect them from the flanks? Without a plan, wouldn't they fall into danger at any time? The scouts were very confused. The only thing they could do was to report back what they saw. As for what to do, it was up to their general to decide. A cannon from afar blew up the army camp, and the general was crippled before the battle began. The news of Ashikaga Yoshimasa being injured and unconscious quickly spread through the army camp. It also reached the ears of Guanxing. Another urgent telegram was sent to Yang Chendong. This made him, who had been bitterly waiting for news, unable to help but heavily slapped the desk in front of him. He laughed heartily and said, "Good, the heavens are helping me. Pass down the order, the entire army will attack according to the plan. Take advantage of the enemy's weakness and take his life." Without a general, the enemy was like a person without a brain. Even if he had 4 limbs and was powerful, what was the use? He was just a human punching bag. On the main battlefield, Yang Chendong's order was quickly passed down to the various troops by the scouts. The 5-star army, who had been waiting for the final attack, became excited. Their battle cries were loud, and could be heard clearly from more than 10 miles away. Then, the army attacked, heading straight for the enemy camp. Back to the Japanese army, the news of Ashikaga Yoshimasa being knocked unconscious had already spread. This made some of the generals have a bad feeling. On the battlefield of 500,000 soldiers, without a unified command, how chaotic would it be? If they couldn't cooperate with each other, how could they unleash their strength to the extreme? Since that was the case, should they choose to fight against the 5-star army's main force without any command? Or choose to retreat? Everyone had different ideas and thoughts. He kept making more and more choices between fighting and retreating. As a result, there were people retreating and people fighting. Not to mention the retreating army, after they left the battlefield, there were a lot of empty positions, which was the most fatal. As a result, some of the Japanese army suddenly realized that they had no allies left or right. What was originally a united front became a lone army. At this time, the 5-star army quickly filled in the gaps and occupied these unoccupied lands. Then, they attacked from the front, left, and right. The Japanese army that stayed behind to defend became targets. When faced with attacks from 3 sides, their defensive line quickly collapsed, and then they were defeated. The good situation was ruined in an instant. Especially the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army, wherever they went, no one could stop them. Infantry was inherently weak against cavalry, and the morale of the army was shaken. The outcome seemed to have been decided long ago. This directly led to the encirclement of the Japanese Empire's lone army. They were heavily injured, and then they surrendered. When the 5 foreign divisions arrived at the front lines, they could only accept prisoners and various supplies. This made them somewhat unwilling. But there was no other way. In terms of speed and impact, they were far too inferior to cavalry. Only the 4th Army Division, the 7th Army, and elite infantry like the 1st Reserve Division could barely keep up with the cavalry and encircle or cripple the Japanese Empire. The development of the war went even more smoothly than planned. In just 3 days, they had defeated nearly 200,000 Japanese army, and captured more than 180,000 of them. When the news reached the rear, Yang Chendong became very excited. He gave the order that the remaining soldiers should chase after the enemy and not follow the example of an overlord. The progress of the war was so smooth that it was impossible for the 5 foreign divisions to complete the task of cleaning up the battlefield and seizing supplies. Based on his past experience, Yang Chendong waved his hand and called for the other foreign and Han people who had already moved to Ping and Beijing to rush to the front lines and help the army clean up the battlefield. They would then distribute the spoils according to their work and reap the benefits. After coming to this world, Yang Chendong felt that some things had changed. For example, using firearms to defeat cold weapons wasn't as exaggerated as it was described in history, where a few people could defeat thousands or even tens of thousands of people. Everything depended on the will to fight. If a few people with firearms were to face off against hundreds of suicide squad members, they wouldn't even dare to say that they could win, let alone thousands or tens of thousands of people. This was also the reason why he still couldn't achieve success even though he had a cold weapon army. Zhu Di, the founder of the Ming Dynasty, had brought a firearms camp to conquer the grassland. But didn't he still win and lose against the grassland cavalry? It didn't mean that he had won a one-sided victory. Of course, some things didn't change, such as the power of the people. Everything had been proven when the dynasty of Phnom Penh was destroyed. The reason why a country was destroyed in 31 days was because of the help of the people. Now he wanted to copy the path of success and borrow the help of the foreign people in Ping and Beijing. Yang Chendong, who had always advocated for the unity of the army and the people, gave his orders. While it was hard to say whether the local aborigines would agree, but a portion of the Hans who had migrated from other races would respond enthusiastically. Some of them were even experienced enough to drive their own carriages out of the city in order to help the army transport more supplies. When tens of thousands of people entered the battlefield, and the number was still increasing, the pressure on the 5 foreign divisions was suddenly reduced. They could finally keep up with the pace of the other main forces. The follow-up forces followed. When Yang Chendong was about to take a breath, the intelligence bureau suddenly reported that a Japanese army of tens of thousands had appeared in the southwest of Ping and Beijing. They were marching rapidly towards Ping and Beijing. The leader was the first general under Ashikaga Yoshimasa, Maori regularization. It turned out that when the news of the Japanese army's defeat and the general's injury and coma reached the Shanin Road, Maori regularization felt that something was wrong. After thinking about it, he decided to take advantage of the fact that Ping and Beijing's military strength was empty to seize the place. In this way, it would be equivalent to cutting off the five-star army's path of retreat. Perhaps it would be able to reverse the entire situation. With this idea in mind, Maori regularization left behind the main forces to continue crushing Sensei Naganabu, while he brought 20,000 soldiers and rushed towards Ping and Beijing. He wanted to take the Japanese Empire by surprise and reverse the situation. He wanted to be the hero of the Japanese Empire. 20,000? When he heard this result, Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with a trace of worry. At this time, the main forces of the five-star army were constantly chasing after the Japanese Empire's army and inflicting heavy losses on them. If he wanted to call them back, it wouldn't be possible in a short period of time. On the contrary, it might cause an accident to the originally victorious situation. However, if he didn't call back the reinforcements, the current Ping and Beijing only had his 1,000 black cavalry and a regiment of new army cavalry. The total number of people was only 3,000. Considering that the security of the city couldn't be left unguarded, especially since most of the foreign races had already left the city and most of the Japanese Empire's natives were in the city, it was even more important to leave some defensive forces behind. Then let's fight. Yang Chendong quickly made a decision. He was determined to bring the 1,000 black cavalry and create another miracle. The black cavalry was Yang Chendong's ultimate bodyguard. Logically speaking, they should be the safest. However, on the battlefield, they had repeatedly become firefighters. Whenever there was danger, they would rush there. Who knew how many times they had played the role of a hero who won against a large number of enemies? This time, they had no choice but to go into battle and fight against a large number of enemies. He called the cavalry commander of the new army over and handed over the task of guarding Ping and Beijing. He told him that he must guard the city gate. If there was no other choice, he could close the gate and defend the city. Naturally, the commander was somewhat unwilling to do so. He even proposed that the sixth young master stay at home and he would lead 2,000 cavalrymen into battle. You can't do it. This is not something that the black cavalry can accomplish. Yang Chendong smiled and rejected the other party's good intentions. This time, it wasn't that he looked down on his soldiers. It was the most correct choice from a practical point of view. After the decision was made, the 1,000 black cavalry were not afraid. On the contrary, they were all eager to fight. This could be seen from the fact that they began to wipe their sabers and constantly check their firearms and equipment. Fighting against 20,000 with 1,000 was an impossible task for any other army. Even the most elite 1st Cavalry Division might not be able to do it. However, when it came to the black cavalry, it was indeed a habit. They had impenetrable black armor, the most advanced firearms, the most tyrannical individual combat power, and the most powerful military leader in the world, Yang Chendong. When all these were gathered together, they were destined to create miracles and reach the peak of life. Among the 1,000 black cavalry, 200 of them were added later. Naturally, they were also the best in each army. They had all joined the 5-star army for more than 2 years and were completely politically qualified and loyal people. Not only that, many of these people were already officers before they joined the black cavalry. Some were platoon leaders, and some were even deputy company commanders. Some of them had great futures ahead of them, but the allure of joining the Black Knights and Dragon Guards was even greater. To be able to join this group was already the greatest achievement and glory of a lifetime. The Black Cavalry was the personal guard of the 6th young master. With this qualification, they would not show any fear even when facing some division commanders or even army commanders. Once they left a good impression in the eyes of the 6th young master, they could expect a great future. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.